3 years ago, a 6-year-old girl vanished right in front of her home in South Carolina, disappearing without a trace and leaving her family plunged into pain and despair. Authorities focused their suspicion on a strange man in an old Bronco that had appeared that very morning. But with no body, no clear evidence, and far too few leads to follow, the investigation quickly stalled. Yet, through all those years, the mother never gave up hope, clinging to the fragile belief that her daughter was still out there somewhere, waiting to be found. Then one day, when a DNA sample was randomly entered into the system, investigators uncovered a crucial detail that everyone had overlooked. A detail powerful enough to upend the entire case in shock in a way no one could have imagined. Before diving deeper into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you like this video, don't forget to hit subscribe. In 1982, Charleston, South Carolina was still considered a safe community where kids could play outside without causing their parents excessive worry. The neighborhoods were quiet. Neighbors knew each other, and the small streets lined with oak trees draped in Spanish moss gave that distinctive, peaceful southern feel. The Russell family lived in a single-story house near the corner, consisting of Father Robert, a technician at the shipyard, Mother Elaine, a preschool teacher, and their 2 children, 12-year-old Caleb and 6-year-old Chloe. Caleb was a quiet boy who loved fixing bikes and rarely left his little sister's side when they were out in the yard, while Chloe was lively and curious, liking to pretend she was a mail carrier, dropping her made-up letters into the small mailbox in front of the house. On the morning of June 14th, the family started the day as usual, Elaine preparing breakfast, Caleb tinkering with his bike, and Chloe running around the yard, holding a little notebook as a prop for her game. No one in the house paid much attention when a dark green Ford Bronco drove slowly past the first time. The unfamiliar vehicle didn't stand out in this peaceful neighborhood, where cars from elsewhere passing through weren't unusual. But just a few minutes later, the Bronco appeared a second time, this time going even slower, as if observing the area. Caleb glanced at it but didn't think it was dangerous. He bent back down to tighten a bolt on the wheel, leaving Chloe to continue her game. When Caleb turned to go inside for a tool, a man from the curbside approached. He stopped a short distance from Chloe and asked in a normal, non-threatening voice about a beagle dog he claimed was missing. Chloe tilted her head, as if thinking but didn't get too close. Before Caleb came back out, the man had already left, returning to the Bronco parked out of sight behind the trees. On the third appearance of the vehicle, the behavior became more unusual. The car stopped for a long time at the intersection, engine idling softly, passenger door slightly ajar, as if waiting. Chloe was still engrossed in playing with her pretend mailbox, while Caleb stood a few dozen meters away, not realizing the rising danger. The critical moment happened in seconds. Chloe stepped off the yard, moving closer to the street line, just as the man appeared from behind the oak tree. He walked quickly and decisively, and by the time Caleb turned around, the man was close enough to pull Chloe off the ground. Chloe was startled, unable to react in time, lifted up, and taken straight into the back seat of the Bronco. The door slammed shut, the engine revved, and the vehicle sped away from the neighborhood in an instant. Caleb ran toward the gate, calling his sister's name in panic, while Elaine rushed out from the house upon hearing the scream, looking around, but seeing no trace of her daughter. The family split up, running along the surrounding streets, calling Chloe continuously, knocking on neighbors' doors, trying to find any sign, but there was nothing except the empty space where the vehicle had just left. After minutes of futile searching, Elaine went back inside, hands shaking as she picked up the phone, eyes still fixed on the road in front, hoping Chloe would reappear, and reported to the police that her daughter had vanished. Elaine's call was routed to the 911 dispatch at 10:17 a.m., classified as an emergency missing child case, and within less than 3 minutes, the nearest patrol unit was dispatched to the Russell home. When the first police car pulled up in the yard, the neighborhood was still in a state of chaos. Caleb running around the curb looking for signs of his sister, Elaine standing with arms clutched to her chest, eyes fixed on the sidewalk where Chloe had disappeared. The first responding officer approached the family, asking them to step back into the yard for safety and to avoid disturbing the potential evidence area. A second unit arrived shortly after, helping to seal off the main road with yellow tape, establishing an initial perimeter around a 50-meter radius from where Chloe was last seen. Police noted the weather conditions: light sunshine, no rain, dry pavement, favorable for identifying ground traces. Traffic volume in the area at the time was relatively low, consistent with a residential neighborhood on a midweek morning. After asking everyone to stay outside the perimeter, the crime scene investigator began directly observing the ground surface near the Russell Gate, where Caleb indicated Chloe had stood last before vanishing. On the soil right at the grass edge, police noted a series of small child footprints matching the description of Chloe's shoes, distributed in a direction from the yard gradually toward the curb. The number of footprints was few, but enough to confirm the victim had moved voluntarily in the initial steps before no further footprints continued toward the roadway. Right next to that area, the investigator discovered two faint parallel grooves shaped like tire tracks, slightly offset to the right side of the road, suggesting the vehicle had parked or stopped briefly. Due to the old asphalt surface exposed to direct sunlight, the tire tracks were hard to identify tread pattern or type, but police still photographed the entire area and used chalk to mark suspected wheel contact points. Preliminary assessment indicated the tracks did not belong to a heavy truck and had a width consistent with popular SUVs or off-road vehicles from the early 1980s. Combined with the faint direction of rubber marks left on the pavement, the scene unit determined the likely departure direction as north-northeast, toward the main road connecting out of the residential area. The investigator compiled a timeline. The time Caleb last saw Chloe was estimated between 10:05 and 10:10. The time the suspect vehicle was believed to have left the area was around 10:10 to 10:12, and the time the family began searching was noted at 10:13. This data was entered into the initial report to serve reconstructing the suspect's path in the golden time frame, laying the foundation for subsequent investigation steps. While the scene unit continued maintaining the perimeter and awaiting specialized forces to take over, another group of officers was immediately deployed to compile a list of potential witnesses within a 200-meter radius of where Chloe was last seen. This area included 8 houses along both sides of the street, a large lawn leading to a shared walkway, and a small intersection often used by passers-by in the morning. The officer in charge of interviews used a door-to-door method, recording demographic information, each person's presence that morning, and their ability to observe the street from their position. From this list, police identified 6 individuals who could have directly observed the area in front of the Russell home during the suspected time, including 2 elderly people home all morning, a mother watching her young child on the porch, a young man fixing a car in the yard, and 2 children playing near the curb. The witnesses were divided into 3 priority levels based on observation position and timing. First, police recorded the statement of Mrs. Henderson, living across from the Russells. She reported that around after 10 o'clock, she heard a vehicle engine running slowly outside her window, but did not look directly as she was folding laundry. However, shortly after, she heard a car door slam hard, the sound echoing clearly in the quiet morning. She didn't see the vehicle or the driver, but the noise was loud enough for police to note as coinciding with the time Caleb said the vehicle left the neighborhood. The next witness was Mr. Daniels, living 3 houses away from the incident site, with a view of the street while watering plants at the gate. He stated he saw a dark green vehicle pass by twice before 10 a.m. The first time it drove normally, the second time slower, as if looking around. He didn't remember the license plate clearly, couldn't identify the state, and didn't get a good look at the driver's face due to sunlight reflecting off the windshield. However, he confirmed the vehicle resembled popular old SUVs from the early 1980s, possibly a Ford Bronco or similar. The youngest witness was 9-year-old Amy, playing on the curb about 70 meters from the Russell home. Amy said she saw a dark green car parked near the corner while kicking a ball across the yard. She only saw the car for a few seconds, didn't see the plate, and couldn't identify anyone inside. What police particularly noted was her description of the parking position closely matching where investigators had marked tire tracks. This information helped reinforce the assumption the vehicle had stopped for a very short time before leaving. Police continued with the statement of Miss Collins standing on her porch watching her young child. She reported seeing a strange man walking along the sidewalk a few minutes before the presumed abduction time. The man wore a light-colored shirt, dark pants, a baseball cap, walking normally without drawing attention. She didn't see him approach any children or any direct interaction at that time. However, her observation of a stranger in an area, usually only with familiar residents, was noted as data needing further verification. Another witness, Trent, fixing his car in the yard, said he only glanced at the green vehicle, thinking it was a visitor to someone in the neighborhood. He couldn't describe the driver or number of occupants. He confirmed only hearing the car running slowly, no screams or unusual sounds. The final priority interviews were with two children playing together at the end of the street. Both confirmed seeing the green vehicle pass 3 times between 9:45 and 10:10, but being engrossed in play, they didn't notice other details. Their information only reinforced the frequency of the vehicle's appearances in the investigation time frame. After completing initial interviews, police began categorizing statements into 2 groups: high investigative value and noise witnesses. Witnesses with matching descriptions of the green vehicle were placed in the important group, especially Mr. Daniels, with 2 direct observations, and Amy with the parking position matching scene tire tracks. The noise group included those only hearing unclear sounds or observing at undetermined times. However, no statements were completely discarded, as police still needed to confirm timeline consistency. From direct sources, the first viable lead gradually took shape: the repeated appearance of a dark green SUV right before and during Chloe's disappearance, accompanied by the figure of a strange man in the area. Based on those initial facts, police immediately moved to an expanded search in a narrow radius, establishing a 1-mile perimeter from where Chloe was last seen. This area included small roads leading to main traffic routes, a sparse wooded strip along the east side of the neighborhood, a drainage ditch running parallel to the road, leading to an open lot, and some wide unused yards. This radius was based on the assumption that the suspect, if driving away immediately after the abduction, would take about 2 minutes to leave direct witness view, and within 10 minutes could have moved far from the neighborhood in multiple directions. To ensure no possibility was missed of the victim being left behind or removed from the vehicle shortly after, K9 units were mobilized from the nearest support. A tracking dog was given a scent sample from Chloe's clothing provided by the family. From the grass edge in front of the Russell yard, the K9 confirmed the victim's initial movement direction along remaining scent near the noted child footprints. The dog quickly led officers to the curb, stopping at the position matching the marked tire tracks. After sniffing around this area, the K9 turned north-northeast, matching the direction the tire marks suggested the vehicle likely left. Police allowed the K9 to track along the main road edge for about 200 meters, but the scent faded and then vanished completely at a small intersection leading to the inner-city highway. This was recorded as the official scent loss point for the K9 team. To cover all terrain thoroughly, the search force divided into 3 teams. The first team checked the sparse eastern woods by following trails, looking for any disturbed soil, trampled grass, or discarded child items. Due to the relatively open forest with little underbrush, the sweep was quick, and the report noted no related signs to the victim. The second team scanned the drainage ditch parallel between the neighborhood and open land, focusing on water direction changes where a suspect might stop briefly unnoticed. The team noted low water levels, many dry sections allowing clear view of slides or object marks. Results showed no signs of objects falling or child footprints in this area. The third team searched the western open lot, occasionally used for temporary parking. This was open terrain with little cover, suitable for quick sweep. Officers checked each tire mark position, but most were old, not distributed in the suspected departure direction from the time frame. When compiling data from all three teams, police revisited suspect movement analysis in the first 10 minutes post-event. With K9 data and faint road tire marks, police assessed the suspect very likely left the neighborhood in one of two directions. First, along the main road to the highway, allowing quick acceleration and exit in minutes. Second, along a small road looping north of the neighborhood, less traffic and possibly helping avoid notice. Evaluating time factors, traffic density and suspect vehicle type, police deemed the highway direction most probable as it fit the goal of quickly creating distance from the incident site. After determining these possibilities, the search team concluded the narrow radius sweep with official note, no additional physical traces found beyond those collected at the scene, and K9 scent lost completely at the intersection, indicating the suspect left the area by vehicle within minutes of the abduction. With the facts established outside the field search and no new leads within the search perimeter, the police returned to the Russell home to focus on the next critical step, verifying all activities of the victim and the family in the 24 hours before Chloe disappeared. The goal of this step was to rule out possibilities related to personal conflicts, review any notable interactions, and cross-reference the information about the stranger that Caleb and Elaine had mentioned in the initial report. The police began with the timeline from the previous afternoon. The family confirmed that June 13th had been completely normal. The whole family had dinner at home. No visitors, no strangers knocked on the door, no packages were delivered, and no unusual phone calls were received. Chloe went to bed around 8 p.m., while Caleb did homework and went to bed an hour later. There were no signs of discord in the family, no arguments or stressful events. The police noted this as an important factor to rule out any internal family involvement in the incident. Moving to the morning of the abduction, Elaine provided details of the routine activities, preparing breakfast, getting Caleb's things ready, and letting Chloe play in the front yard before the family planned to leave the house late in the morning. Caleb confirmed that during this time, no one in the family left the house, and there were no visitors or strangers approaching the front door. When asked about the strange man that Caleb had mentioned in the initial report, he recounted the timeline again for the police to cross-check. According to Caleb, the stranger first appeared when the Bronco drove past slower than normal, then disappeared from view. The second time, Caleb saw the stranger walk from behind the vehicle toward Chloe, but with no coercive behavior at that moment. Caleb also recalled that the man slightly bent down when speaking, his body language was not hurried, and his gait was normal. The police noted this as intentional approaching behavior carried out in a way that minimized the chance of drawing attention. Elaine added that she did not hear any conversation between the stranger and her daughter, but she had seen the silhouette of a man through the kitchen window about a minute before the incident occurred. This detail helped reinforce the timeline provided by Caleb and indicated that the stranger had been near the yard area for a sufficient time to observe and approach the child. When asked about the strange vehicle, both Caleb and Elaine described its distinctive dark green color, boxy shape, and height, suggesting an older SUV model. Caleb remembered that the vehicle passed by steadily but not quickly, as if searching for a particular house. Elaine did not directly see the vehicle up close, but caught its color and general shape when it passed by the last time. The police noted two key details. First, the vehicle appeared repeatedly in the minutes before the abduction. Second, the direction of travel matched the tire track data at the scene. These factors allowed the initial investigative focus to remain centered on the suspect vehicle. The next part of the information gathering focused on assessing whether the family had any personal conflicts that could be related to the disappearance. The police asked about relationships with neighbors, co-workers, relatives, and anyone who had close contact with the family in recent months. Both Elaine and Robert affirmed that they had no financial disputes, no legal conflicts, no disgruntled relatives, and no one who had ever threatened the family. Caleb also stated that no strange adults had recently inquired about Chloe, and Chloe showed no unusual behavioral changes before the day of the incident. Caleb's school records and Chloe's medical records were quickly reviewed to rule out any signs related to child care issues or prior family surveillance. The police found no abnormalities. Some questions were asked to clarify the possibility of long-term stalking of the family, but both parents recalled no instances of strange vehicles appearing frequently before the day of the incident. When cross-referencing all statements, the police noted three groups of facts. First, no unusual activity in the family in the 24 hours before the disappearance. Second, the appearance of the stranger and strange vehicle occurred only in the minutes before the event, not over multiple days. Third, no personal conflict factors or motives related to acquaintances. These points helped narrow the investigation to the hypothesis of an unknown suspect who selected the target based on opportunity or a short observation period before committing the crime. Once the information gathering from the Russell family was complete and the picture of the context before the disappearance became clearer, the police immediately moved to the next step, analyzing the suspect vehicle, the investigative direction deemed most likely to yield concrete value in the early stage. Based on statements from multiple independent witnesses about a dark green older SUV seen before and during Chloe's disappearance, investigators decided to focus on Ford Broncos from the late 1970s to early 1980s, a model line whose appearance matched the general witness descriptions. The first step was to compile a list of all registered Broncos in the Charleston area and surrounding regions. The Department of Motor Vehicles provided registration data showing a total of 142 Ford Broncos of matching years within a 20-mile radius of the Russell neighborhood. This list included vehicles currently in use, those with suspended registration, and some out-of-state registered, but with temporary local addresses. The police filtered to focus on vehicles painted green or possibly repainted recently, narrowing the list to 57 vehicles. Next, the investigative team cross-referenced location, time, and owner to determine if any of those vehicles had been near the incident area on the morning of Chloe's disappearance. A group of officers was assigned to visit each owner's address on the list, verifying the vehicle's condition where it was parked on the morning of the incident and collecting alibi information. Of the 57 owners contacted within the first 24 hours, 36 provided clear alibis by being at work, attending scheduled meetings, or having witnesses confirm they did not use the vehicle that morning. These alibis were fully documented and temporarily removed from suspicion. However, 21 cases could not be fully verified for the critical time frame. Some owners stated their vehicle remained parked at home but lacked independent confirmation, while others could not recall whether they used it that morning. Within this group, the police inspected the vehicles for signs matching witness description. Vehicles with dark green paint were prioritized. Some had multiple repaint layers or faded areas, making exact matches to witness descriptions difficult. The police noted 2 Broncos with high degrees of match, one owned by a man living alone in the northern suburbs, and one owned by a family restoring the vehicle, but unable to provide an alibi for the 10 o'clock, 10:15 a.m. window. However, upon deeper inspection, neither vehicle showed signs of stopping near the Russell home that day, tires did not match the scene tracks, and no gravel, red dirt, or street material from the incident area adhered to the tires. These differences led to both vehicles being noted, but not elevated to primary suspect status. Another factor considered was the possibility that the vehicle seen in the neighborhood was not locally registered. One witness reported the license plate might not be from South Carolina, though unconfirmed. This opened scenarios where the suspect drove from another state or used fake plates, complicating tracing via registration data. The police also noted that many older Broncos modified or repainted by owners could differ significantly from standard descriptions, limiting the registration-based verification process. During this phase, investigators began building a list of potential suspects based on the vehicle, including those without alibis and vehicles matching color, size, and observed behavior at the scene. This list was not to confirm suspects, but to narrow the group for deeper checks in later stages. From the initial 57 vehicles, the police filtered to 12, requiring more thorough evaluation, based on criteria like similar paint, owner travel history through the area, or unverified alibis. For each of the 12 vehicles, the team collected information on repair history, repaint frequency, recent travel logs, and any unusual changes related to the vehicle. Some were confirmed to have passed through the Russell neighborhood on the incident day, but eliminated because nearby store cameras verified the owner was en route to work at the abduction time, not matching the critical window. When compiling all data, the police assessed the reliability of the vehicle lead. Although witnesses provided consistent descriptions of color and shape, the lack of specifics like license plates, unique identifiers, or precise driver descriptions meant no basis yet existed to attribute responsibility to one specific vehicle. The police concluded that the dark green Bronco lead was an important investigative direction, but not yet strong enough to identify a single suspect. Nevertheless, the lead retained value, as it allowed circumscribing suspicious behavior and laying groundwork for verifying vehicles and owners in subsequent steps. After completing the review of the Bronco list without obtaining leads strong enough to significantly narrow the suspect pool, the police moved to the next necessary approach, expanding the search beyond the neighborhood and checking routes leading from the Russell area to Charleston's main gateways. The goal of this phase was to determine if the suspect might have traveled major roadways in the initial minutes after leaving the street, while searching for any traces possibly left along the way. City Highway Patrol was immediately coordinated to set up observation points on main arteries north, east, and west, including Savannah Highway, Rivers Avenue, and routes to U.S. Route 17. Patrol teams were deployed to areas the suspect likely passed through 10 to 20 minutes post-abduction. Charleston Harbor Police were also mobilized to monitor riverside roads or port-adjacent areas in case the suspect veered toward the riverbank or used low-traffic zones for brief stops. Inter-district patrol units were notified to heighten surveillance on routes exiting Charleston toward Mount Pleasant, Somerville, and North Charleston, ensuring the suspect could not easily leave the area undetected. During the expanded search deployment, police focused on points likely to retain traces, including soft dirt shoulders, temporary pull-offs, low-traffic side roads, parking lots near parks, unfinished construction sites, and vacant lots along main roads. Officers searched for tire tracks matching the pattern and direction recorded at the Russell scene, though the scene tracks lacked clear tread detail, but could still serve for comparison on contact position or movement. One team searching outbound routes found a faint tire segment on the shoulder of a side road connecting to Highway 17, but upon checking, it did not match the predicted direction and distance for the suspect in the first 10 minutes. Other shoulder traces were assessed as from local trucks or construction vehicles, yielding no investigative value. Another area checked was open lots or hidden corners near intersections, where the suspect might have briefly stopped to control the victim or assess the situation before proceeding. Many such areas were searched, but no child items, fabric pieces, or soil disturbances matching Chloe's disappearance timeframe were found. As inter-district patrols extended into the Charleston, North Charleston boundary, a few reports noted a green vehicle speeding through an old industrial area, but these lacked direct evidence and second witness confirmation. Highway Patrol recorded no matching vehicles caught by speed cameras, and limited observation stations at the time meant collected data was insufficient to clearly determine the suspect's route. Harbor Police checked small docks along the Ashley River for any vehicle stops, but no fresh tire marks or mud disturbances indicated the suspect vehicle had been there. Some fishing boats at port areas were questioned, but none reported seeing any matching vehicle. When compiling reports from all participating forces in the expanded search, the police noted no direct traces indicating where the suspect traveled after leaving the neighborhood. However, based on estimated speed and timing data, police identified three most likely directions outbound on Route 17 to leave the city toward low-traffic industrial areas or along riverside routes before merging onto major roads. Although no clear physical evidence was obtained in this phase, the expanded search helped eliminate many potential areas and reinforced the assessment that the suspect likely left Charleston very quickly, increasingly limiting chances of collecting direct traces. As the search radius expanded, but still yielded no specific signs from the crime scene or the suspected routes, police began facing a new development. Numerous reports from the public claiming they had seen a little girl resembling Chloe in various different locations. This is a common situation in child missing person cases when community psychology is heavily impacted and many people believe they have accidentally spotted the victim. Within 24 hours after the case, information spread widely. The tip line received more than 24 calls and messages reporting sightings. The reports were categorized by location, time, and degree of match with the initial description of Chloe in order to prioritize screening. The first report came from a woman who said she saw a blonde little girl sitting in a green car in the parking lot of a supermarket about 3 miles from the Russell home. However, when the response team arrived to check, the described vehicle turned out to belong to a local family, and the girl inside had no match with Chloe other than hair color. The next report was recorded at a gas station near Route 17, where a man said he saw a little girl who appeared frightened in the back seat of a dark-colored car. However, the time he saw the car was around 9:30 a.m., while Chloe was confirmed missing after 10 a.m., causing this report to be dismissed as inconsistent with the event timeline. Another report stated that a little girl was seen crying inside an SUV in the North Charleston shopping area, but the witness could not confirm the vehicle color, did not see the driver, and the observation time was not clearly established. When police checked the area's surveillance cameras, no footage matched the description. Another call came from a man who said he heard a child screaming from a car speeding through the Garden Oaks residential neighborhood, but when that route was checked, police found no trace and no second witness confirmed hearing similar sounds. Among the reports, one piece of information was treated more seriously when a store employee near the highway said a little girl was pulled into a car by an adult. However, the description of the adult did not match at all the witness descriptions from the Russell neighborhood area. The man was described as shorter, stockier, and with darker hair, a significant difference from what previous witnesses had provided. Police reviewed the store's security footage and determined the incident was a misunderstanding. It was a father leading his tantruming child into the car. There were also reports that were clearly mistaken or based on inaccurate memory. One caller said he saw a little girl and a man walking near Riverfront Park, but the time was before Chloe was last seen. Some reports came from areas too far away, such as Somerville or Goose Creek, which were incompatible with the 10-20-minute window after the vehicle left the scene, causing them to be classified as implausible information. There were also cases where people described dark green vehicles that were different models, not in the Bronco line, or described seeing a green vehicle, but with no child inside. All of these reports were logged, cross-checked, and eliminated in order of priority to avoid diverting resources during the initial phase of the investigation. Some reports were even determined to be deliberately false. One call from a young man claimed he saw a man acting suspiciously next to a Bronco parked on a vacant lot near the river. However, when a patrol unit arrived, there was no vehicle matching the description, and the caller later admitted he just wanted to help the investigation move faster by exaggerating details. These kinds of reports not only provided no useful information, but also wasted investigators' time and resources. Police noted a clear trend: the more people who learned about the disappearance, the higher the number of sightings of blonde little girls, most of which had no factual basis. This directly affected the investigation's progress because every report had to be processed according to procedure: preliminary verification, timeline comparison, location check, and elimination if it did not match the scene data. In a context where time was critical, having to handle noise reports slowed down the pursuit of valuable leads. To reduce the burden on the main investigation team, a group of officers was assigned specifically to receive and screen new reports. This group used clear criteria. A report had to contain at least 2 matching elements, reasonable location within the timeline, description of the victim's appearance, description of the vehicle or stranger, before it would be escalated to the next level of processing. When this criterion was applied, the vast majority of reports were eliminated at the initial screening stage. Ultimately, after compiling all community information, police concluded that none of the received reports had high verification value or fit the event timeline. Information noise became a significant challenge, making it harder to determine the suspect's direction of travel after leaving the neighborhood, forcing investigators to focus on hard data obtained from the scene rather than relying on inaccurate public tips. When the expanded search activities and processing of all community reports concluded, police compiled all valid leads collected during the initial 1982 investigation phase to clearly assess what was valuable, what had been ruled out, and what information gaps still existed. The data was divided into 4 main groups: scene evidence, witness statements, information about the suspect vehicle, and results of the expanded area search. From the scene, valid leads included child footprints leading to the curb, faint tire marks at the location matching witnesses' descriptions of where the vehicle stopped, and the K9 tracking the scent to the intersection before losing it completely. These elements confirmed that the victim left the area by vehicle in a very short time and supported the assessment that the suspect had preparation or at least was familiar enough with the neighborhood layout to approach, reapproach, and leave without obstruction. From witness statements, 3 consistent points were deemed valid: the repeated appearance of a dark green vehicle resembling an older SUV, the appearance of a strange man before the incident, and the vehicle's departure time coinciding with the brief moment Caleb went back inside the house. Additionally, no witnesses heard screaming, indicating the abduction was carried out quickly, silently, and likely prevented the victim from reacting in time. The fact that multiple independent witnesses described the same type of vehicle, same color, and same timing created a solid data cluster, even though it lacked critical identifying details such as license plate or distinctive features of the driver. From vehicle analysis results, police confirmed that about 20 Bronco owners in the area had no clear alibi, but none of those vehicles fully matched the physical traces or behavior recorded at the scene. This kept the vehicle line of inquiry valuable, but not strong enough to identify a specific suspect. Another important point was the possibility that the vehicle was not registered in Charleston, or that the suspect used invalid plates, increasing the difficulty of administrative tracing. From the expanded search, the main conclusion was that no new physical traces were found on routes leaving the area, no discarded items, and no additional witnesses outside the neighborhood who saw the victim after the incident time. All community reports, when carefully cross-checked, either did not fit the timeline or did not provide sufficient verification elements, causing them to be classified as noise information. Elimination followed criteria: no time match, no location match, or no 2 independent sources confirming. Based on all valid data, police evaluated plausible hypotheses about the abduction sequence. Hypothesis 1. The abduction was carried out by an individual unknown to the family, selecting the target based on random opportunity in a very short time window. This fit the fact that the strange man only appeared that morning, and there was no data indicating prolonged stalking. This hypothesis was rated highly feasible because the actions recorded at the scene were quick, left few traces, and were not tied to any personal relationship. Hypothesis 2. The suspect may have observed the area beforehand, not over many days, but only for a few minutes or a few loops around the block. The Bronco's repeated appearance 3 times in less than half an hour supported this possibility, but there was no evidence to determine the degree of preparation. This hypothesis's feasibility was rated medium, as no details proved prior intent, but nothing ruled it out either. Hypothesis 3. Involvement of an acquaintance or someone with a conflict with the family. This hypothesis was quickly eliminated because there were no personal conflicts, no signs of anyone stalking the family, and no statements pointing to a family acquaintance appearing near the scene. Final hypothesis: the victim left the area on her own and was coincidentally picked up by someone. This hypothesis did not fit the footprints, tire marks, or witness descriptions, as the abduction clearly showed proactive behavior from the suspect. In the overall assessment, police identified 3 critical information gaps: lack of an accurate suspect description, lack of data on license plate or vehicle identifying features, and lack of traces indicating direction of travel after the intersection where the K9 lost the scent. These gaps prevented the investigation from advancing a significant step in the early phase. Compiling all valid elements, police reached a final assessment of the initial phase. The data confirmed the abduction occurred quickly, with minimal preparation, using a vehicle, and unrelated to personal conflicts, but lacked specific enough information to track the suspect in the short term after the incident. By early 1984, after nearly 2 years of continuous investigation, but with no new leads capable of expanding the suspect's search, the investigating agency officially moved Chloe Russell's missing person case from active investigation status to a suspended file, following procedure for cases that no longer have developable data over a long period. The decision was made after reviewing the entire 1982 investigation process and determining no further investigative steps could be taken with the existing information sources. The file was closed for active work but not terminated, meaning the case remained open, awaiting new conditions or evidence. Following official direction, all related documents were transferred to the archives of the Charleston County Cold Case Unit, where unsolved cases that still have potential for reopening when technology or investigative conditions change are stored. Investigators conducted a review and cataloged all evidence collected during the initial phase. The list included crime scene photographs, including child footprints and tire marks, soil and asphalt samples taken from the curb area for future tire comparison, timeline records from 10 a.m. to 10:20 a.m. on the day of the incident, detailed statements from Caleb and Elaine, 6 witness statements within a 200-meter radius, K9 search activity reports, data from the Bronco vehicle canvass in the area, and the initial investigation phase summary report. In addition, non-conclusive but potentially useful items for future comparison were preserved, including chalk marks at the scene, a neighborhood map marked with suspected vehicle directions, and a list of vehicles without confirmed alibis. All evidence was sealed according to the standards of that era and placed in a dedicated storage box, then assigned a code number and entered into the Cold Case Unit catalog system for long-term tracking. Concurrent with evidence archiving, investigators created a list of witnesses who would need re-interviewing if the file were reopened. This list included Mr. Daniels, who saw the vehicle twice, young Amy, who noted the parking position almost matching the tire marks, Miss Collins, who saw the strange man before the incident, and 2 other witnesses who saw the green vehicle pass multiple times. Additionally, Caleb and Elaine were listed as core witnesses because their statements were the only direct source about events immediately before the abduction. All these individuals were categorized by re-interview priority. Group 1 for direct observers, Group 2 for those who heard sounds or observed indirectly, Group 3 for residents of the area at the time who did not witness the incident. Creating a systematic witness list ensured that if new technology or information emerged, investigators could return to them without having to rebuild the entire witness foundation from scratch. Finally, the case summary also noted investigative steps that could not be performed in 1982 due to technical and surveillance infrastructure limitations. These limitations included inability to extract license plates from witness descriptions due to lack of street cameras, inability to analyze tire samples in detail because tread pattern comparison technology was limited, inability to cross-check out-of-state vehicle registrations quickly, inability to expand vehicle searches beyond the county on the first day because interagency coordination mechanisms at the time were ineffective, inability to use biometric identification or genetic analysis because those technologies did not yet exist in civilian investigations. All these factors were included in the final report to document the full operational challenges of the early period, laying the groundwork for adjustments and re-evaluation when technology or investigative methods change in the future. Upon completion of the process, the Chloe Russell case box, bearing its identification code, was placed in Aisle 4, Unsolved section of the Cold Case Unit, officially marking the transition from active investigation to storage pending new conditions. From the moment the case was transferred to the Cold Case Unit archive in 1984 until many decades later, what happened to Chloe Russell outside the oversight of investigative agencies can only be reconstructed based on scattered data, subsequently generated documents, and relocation milestones identified when information was cross-referenced years later. This 40-year timeline reveals that the victim was not only removed from the state of South Carolina in the initial phase, but also underwent multiple identity changes, continuously moved between sparsely populated areas, and lived in an environment of near-total isolation. Late cross-reference data shows that the victim was renamed in the early phase after leaving Charleston. The name Anna Carson first appeared in a medical document in Central Tennessee in 1984, with no accompanying birth certificate, no clear guardian information, and recorded as self-reported. The lack of official paperwork made verifying Anna's identity in administrative records nearly impossible, and this gap was one of the reasons why authorities at the time did not connect this case to the 1982 disappearance. In the following years, administrative data was very limited, but still allowed identification of some residency milestones for the victim. From 1984 to around 1987, Anna was recorded as living in a log house in rural eastern Tennessee, based on cash purchase receipts and another medical visit noting a temporary address. This area was far from population centers, more than a 20-minute drive from the nearest town, consistent with the characteristics of an isolated living environment. During this period, there was no data on Anna attending school, no school records, and no evidence of social interaction with other children. From the late 1980s to the early 1990s, data emerged in Kentucky, where several purchase documents and machinery repair services were recorded under the name Carson. These documents indicate that the victim and her guardian continuously moved between small towns, often staying only briefly before relocating again. The common feature of these locations was low population, sparse housing, and a high rate of short-term renters, allowing changes of residence to occur easily, without leaving many administrative traces. The victim's living environment during this phase had a high degree of isolation, as most information obtained from later data cross-referencing showed no records of regular medical care, no school data, no community involvement records, or local event participation. This suggests the victim lived under tight control, with minimal social contact and complete dependence on the guardian for all daily activities. Moving into the early 1990s, two new milestones appeared in North Carolina when several transactions for food and basic supplies under the name Carson showed up in records from mountain grocery stores. As in the previous phase, there were no rental contracts or official residency registrations, indicating the victim continued to live in areas that did not require identification documents and could easily blend into small communities with lax oversight. This data confirms that the victim had moved through at least 3 states in less than a decade and showed no signs of accessing education or being entered into the formal care system. The identity changes also led to anomalous records in the files. In some appearances, Anna Carson was listed with different birth years, varying by 1 to 3 years from Chloe's actual age, indicating the guardian intentionally altered information to avoid tracing. The period from 1990 to 1995 was marked by sparse appearances of the name Carson in purchase or service records in western North Carolina, an area with hilly terrain, low population density, and many people living outside traditional record systems. This was also the phase that most clearly demonstrated the degree of isolation, as records related to health, education, or employment were virtually non-existent, except for a single 1993 medical bill for persistent stomach pain, with no family information and only a temporary address at a weekly rental property. After 1995, the data became even more fragmented as no further records linked to the guardian appeared in later systems. Meanwhile, milestones related to the victim continued to show ongoing movement without fixed points, creating a period of unclear data lasting over a decade. The late 1990s and early 2000s marked a phase where information virtually disappeared from accessible systems, with no purchase receipts, no residency records, and no signs of engagement with any service facilities. This information gap made determining the developments in the victim's life particularly difficult and indicated a near absolute level of isolation in the living environment at that time. It was not until the mid-2000s that new traces reappeared in the system through a few records related to low-cost medical services in the Asheville, North Carolina area. These documents did not specify occupation or family circumstances, only confirming the existence of a woman named Anna Carson in her late 20s, without insurance, without employment records, and without providing a stable address. This is considered the only milestone bridging the gaps spanning decades, allowing partial reconstruction of the victim's relocation journey and living conditions. From that data, when investigators traced back the appearances of the identity Anna Carson across various areas, verifying the guardian associated with this identity quickly led to the name Earl Whitaker in the 2022 case file. From scattered medical documents, purchase receipts, and temporary residency data collected in Tennessee, Kentucky, and North Carolina, investigators determined that the man accompanying the victim at multiple points in time matched an individual with a prior record in the military system. The traceback process began by cross-referencing the name Whitaker appearing in some documents related to equipment repairs and rentals in Kentucky in the late 1980s, gradually leading to the military record of a man named Earl Whitaker, born in 1948, enlisted in 1969, and discharged in 1974 after serving in a logistics unit during the final phase of the Vietnam War. The military record noted that Whitaker had been assessed with post-traumatic stress disorder, showed signs of difficulty reintegrating after returning home, and was placed on short-term monitoring. However, at that time, evaluation standards and treatment methods were limited, causing the monitoring record to end quickly without additional data. After leaving the military, Whitaker moved to eastern Tennessee around 1975, working seasonal labor and small equipment repairs. Residency records show he frequently changed addresses within a few small towns, mostly short-term rentals or mobile homes. From 1977 to 1982, data indicates Whitaker moved between Tennessee and Kentucky, regularly renting in sparsely populated, loosely regulated areas. Residency milestones were inconsistent, with months-long gaps in data, suggesting he lived outside official record systems or temporarily in areas not requiring residency registration. Whitaker's criminal record during this period shows 2 instances of local police noting him for disorderly conduct and a 1979 report of approaching children in a park in a manner deemed inappropriate by parents. Although there were no criminal charges, the incident was recorded in local police internal files. Another case occurred in 1981 in Kentucky, when Whitaker was questioned after a boy reported that a strange man asked if he wanted to see the puppy he was keeping. However, there was no evidence of crime, and since the child's statement could not confirm the identity of the approacher, the matter did not proceed further. These incidents indicate a pattern of potentially risky behavior, even without clear convictions. In constructing the timeline from 1970 to 1995, investigators noted that the times Whitaker appeared in residency data showed notable overlaps with areas where the identity Anna Carson was later recorded. In particular, from 1983 to 1987, Whitaker and Anna appeared together in purchase receipts in eastern Tennessee, indicating that the time the victim was removed from South Carolina coincided with the period Whitaker left his residency in Kentucky to move to Tennessee. The absence of any official records for Anna in administrative systems further reinforced the likelihood that the victim was completely dependent on Whitaker during this time. Local notes on Whitaker's mental state also indicated a tendency toward isolation, avoiding social interaction, and living in remote areas. The combination of untreated PTSD, unstable lifestyle, and scattered incidents of approaching children over the years formed a notable risk behavior pattern. During the 1988 to 1995 period, data continued to record Whitaker moving with Anna to Kentucky and then North Carolina. His financial records from this phase show unstable income, mainly from machinery repairs and seasonal work. Several household item receipts under Whitaker's name overlapped in time and location with Anna's residency milestones, strengthening the hypothesis that they lived together for many years. When reviewing legal records from this period, investigators noted that Whitaker was not arrested or prosecuted in any serious cases, but was questioned at least twice regarding his presence near areas where child harassment was reported. Both incidents did not lead to legal conclusions, but were sufficient to indicate Whitaker's tendency to appear near children in unclear contexts. The time frame from 1970 to 1995, when fully compiled, reveals a continuous chain of movement without fixed points, consistent with the pattern of an individual seeking to avoid tracking. At the same time, records of child-approaching behavior, though not leading to prosecution, were enough to flag Whitaker as high risk in cases involving minors. When placing Whitaker's residency data chain alongside the fragmented information about Anna Carson, the overlaps in timing and location indicate that Whitaker controlled nearly the entire trajectory of the victim in the early years after leaving South Carolina. Building on that foundation, when connecting data from multiple sources and cross-referencing with Whitaker's life timeline, the phase when the victim entered ages 10-20 emerges as a series of fragmented but consistent movements following a pattern of tight control, leaving no administrative traces and always maintaining prolonged isolation. This data was primarily identified through cash payment receipts, sparse medical documents, temporary residency notes, and some information obtained from localities where Whitaker had appeared. In the phase from 1988 to the early 1990s, the victim was recorded in eastern Tennessee in several informal medical visits, one purchase of cold medicine at a community clinic, and a few grocery transactions from local stores. This data indicates the victim lived as a member of a continuously moving household, without educational records or identification documents. When investigators searched for school records in districts across Tennessee, Kentucky, and North Carolina, no school recorded the name Anna Carson or any variant of this identity. This confirms a high likelihood that the victim was not formally enrolled in school, consistent with Whitaker's frequent relocation lifestyle and avoidance of interaction with the education system, which requires birth certificates and identifying information. From purchase receipts and some medical visit location notes, the investigative team compiled a summary table of the victim's residences during ages 10-20. This summary shows a clear relocation cycle from 1988 to 1990 in Tennessee. From 1990 to around 1993, moving to rural Kentucky areas. Then from 1993 to around 1995, relocating to western North Carolina. Each move was tied to sparsely populated areas where renting did not require strong identity verification, and living conditions could be maintained at a minimal level without detection by authorities. In Tennessee, the recorded data primarily came from a low-cost clinic in a small town, where Anna Carson was brought in twice for colds. The doctor noted the guardian paid in cash and provided no contact information or long-term address. The temporary address on file matched only a weekly rental house with no clear landlord registration. This was a residency pattern consistent with Whitaker's habits and enabled maintaining the false identity without local authorities questioning it. When moving to Kentucky in the 1990-1993 period, the victim appeared in numerous machinery repair and household shopping receipts under the names Carson or Whitaker. Here, the residency pattern continued with frequent shifts between small towns, staying only a few months in each. These areas had lax oversight, no requirement for identity proof when renting with cash, and infrequent cross-checking of residency information across counties. This allowed Whitaker to move freely, without anyone noticing the lack of school or stable medical records for the victim. During this phase, there was also no information indicating the victim had significant social contact outside the household. The absence of school records, community activity data, or any other official records reflects prolonged isolation, leaving the victim no opportunity to build relationships or leave administrative traces. The next timeline milestone is scattered data from western North Carolina around 1993-1995, where food, supply, and equipment repair receipts continued to show the presence of Whitaker and Carson in the same area. The mountainous terrain of this region, with many isolated small communities, fit Whitaker's preferred residency pattern: easy to blend in, minimal oversight, and no need for identification to rent or shop. Also during this time, the victim was recorded once visiting a local clinic for stomach pain, but provided no family or medical history information, and the record lacked the birth year section, a consistent sign of an identity not established in the system. The victim's lack of legal paperwork throughout ages 10-20 made the entire verification process of life events entirely dependent on off-system data fragments, with no fixed point allowing prior authorities to recognize the existence of a child living outside the administrative system for years. When evaluating Whitaker's regional relocation cycle, investigators identified a clear repeating pattern. Each area was stayed in only briefly before moving to a new location far enough to avoid familiarity, yet still within similar cultural and geographic ranges, helping maintain the victim's isolation without drawing attention. Based on that model, when the victim entered the age range of 20-40, administrative traces began to appear more sporadically than during the teenage years, but they still clearly reflected a lifestyle outside the system, leaving only minimal records through small financial transactions, irregular medical visits, and basic survival activities. Reviewing these traces allows for a clearer picture of how the victim survived throughout 2 decades of adulthood, without legal documentation, while also helping to identify certain behavioral characteristics valuable for comparison during the investigation. The first trace related to financial transactions appeared in the late 1990s, when several grocery stores and discount household goods stores in the Asheville, North Carolina area recorded cash transactions under the name Anna Carson. Although ID was not required for small transactions, the recording of this name indicates that the victim had likely begun using the identity Carson as a familiar identifier, even though it was not verified in any official system. These transactions were of small value, primarily involving food, personal hygiene items, household supplies, and a few purchases of basic clothing. There were no transactions indicating large spending, bank accounts, or signs of participation in the formal labor market. In the early 2000s, hospital data began to reappear. A community clinic in Asheville recorded Anna Carson visiting twice over a 3-year period, once for mild respiratory inflammation and once for a wrist injury described as a fall while doing housework. With no health insurance, no identification documents, and no stable address provided, the victim was treated as a walk-in patient paying cash. This data shows that the victim continued to live in limited economic conditions, unable or unwilling to participate in public health assistance programs that required personal information. From these reports, investigators identified some personal identifying markers: height approximately 5'3" inches in the early 2000s, no obvious physical deformities aside from an old scar on the wrist. This data became an important benchmark for comparison with the 1982 missing person file in later stages of the investigation. In addition to medical traces, transaction data from several discount stores showed that the victim frequently purchased minimal household items with no entertainment products, technology, or items indicating a higher standard of living. This reflects a high degree of self-sufficiency and the frugal lifestyle characteristic of someone relying entirely on a restricted environment. Also during this period, investigators identified several lifestyle behaviors of investigative value. First, the victim almost never appeared in long-term rental records, but some landlords in the Asheville suburbs recorded renting rooms or small houses on a cash-paid weekly basis during scattered periods from 2001 to 2008. These landlords did not keep copies of identification documents, consistent with the fact that the victim had no legal papers to present. The frequent cash-based rentals demonstrate basic survival independence while confirming that the victim did not enter any resident management system. Second, the victim appeared on lists for some seasonal labor jobs at local farmers markets and small craft workshops, typically on a daily pay basis, without contracts or personal information requirements. Some co-workers interviewed later described the person named Anna Carson as quiet, hard-working, avoiding social contact, and never mentioning family or past. These activities, though leaving no strong administrative traces, show that the victim was able to maintain a minimal livelihood through jobs not requiring clear identification. Third, throughout these 2 decades, the victim had no data related to driver's licenses, bank accounts, tax filings, or any activities requiring identification, confirming the prolonged off-the-grid status. The absence from formal employment lists or public welfare programs further reinforces the assessment that the victim maintained complete anonymity. Another notable trace was the appearance of some small invoices related to repairs of household appliances or work tools, indicating that the victim was likely engaged in common manual labor in daily life. Although these transactions did not record guardian information, they show that the victim maintained a certain level of independent living despite lacking support from the legal system. When synthesizing all the data for the 2040 age period, investigators observed a common pattern. The victim lived on the boundary between administrative existence and legal invisibility. With no identification documents, no school records, no formal employment history, and almost no social traces, the victim sustained life through cash transactions, unregistered work, and sporadic contacts with the healthcare system. It was in this context that in 2022, when commercial DNA testing services and genealogy platforms became widespread, the identity of Anna Carson inadvertently entered the decisive turning point of the entire case. The moment she agreed to voluntarily submit a DNA sample to learn about health information and family origins. This was initially not driven by suspicion of identity, but by the need to check genetic disease risks, as the victim had experienced multiple health issues without any family medical history records. The DNA sample was sent to a popular testing company, processed as a standard gene scan with no legal purpose. When the results were analyzed, the company's system detected multiple anomalies. The DNA profile under the name Anna Carson did not match any family groups in the stored data. Instead, the algorithm identified weak but clear genetic clusters connecting to numerous public genealogy profiles belonging to families in South Carolina, particularly the Charleston area. This triggered an automated process in the system designed to suggest possible relations to a family in a specific geographic region or a lost branch of ancestry. However, in this case, the genetic chain did not match any Carson lineage, and the name Carson did not appear in any related family branches. As the genealogy algorithm continued matching, it detected a stronger signal. The DNA sequence partially matched the profile of another user who uploaded data in 2019, identifying as a distant relative of the Russell family in Charleston. The emergence of this DNA connection between Anna Carson and a Russell family profile caused the system to automatically issue an internal alert under procedures for cases potentially involving missing persons. While testing companies typically do not directly intervene in investigations, they have a responsibility to handle cases showing signs of serious identity violation or mismatch. The initial alert led to the analysis department reviewing the victim's entire DNA data chain. After cross-checking with multiple representative samples in public genealogy databases, the department determined that the victim was likely part of the Russell Group or a closely related branch. This was the first time in over 40 years that a DNA signal indirectly connected to the 1982 child disappearance appeared in a system. Per procedure, the testing company sent a notification to the user requesting verification of personal information or contact with support if identity discrepancy was suspected. The victim, having no documents and no knowledge of true origins, responded that she had no family records for comparison. Meanwhile, the fact that many potential DNA relatives were located in South Carolina left her confused and unable to understand why the results completely contradicted the story she had been told in the past. During this process, another anomaly emerged. The victim's DNA sample exhibited many characteristics consistent with the genetic structure of someone born in the early 1980s. Contrary to the birth year she had been instructed to use on purchase forms and medical records over decades. This mismatch caused the system to continue flagging the profile as highly suspicious under technical standards, not legal ones. Upon deeper analysis, the genealogy algorithm discovered that the sample significantly matched a pair of profiles from two Russell family members who had tested in previous years, one of whom was a cousin of the family of the 1982 missing victim. This connection chain was strong enough for the system to issue a second alert, classifying the case as potentially involving an individual with misidentification or victim of an unresolved missing person event. The testing company had no authority to report to authorities unless permitted by the user or if results involved direct risk. However, when the victim contacted support to ask about the discrepancy between DNA results and what she believed about her origins, her inquiries led to her consenting to allow the company to use the DNA sample for open profile matching, an option for those seeking lost relatives. Upon consent, the data was transferred to a linked genealogy platform specialized in identification projects for missing persons and unidentified victims. There, the victim's DNA results were compared against over 60,000 missing person profiles, matching the age range. Within 36 hours, the matching algorithm identified that the victim's DNA sequence matched the stored profile of Chloe Russell, the child missing in 1982 from Charleston, with a match level high enough to be classified as direct family match. This is a rarity unless the individuals are the same person or very closely related. When the genealogy system reached a preliminary conclusion that the person known as Anna Carson was likely Chloe Russell, the victim of an unsolved abduction, an automatic alert was immediately forwarded to the National Missing Persons Case Processing Center, per standard procedure for DNA matches with open cases. Upon receiving this alert in late 2022, the Charleston County Cold Case Unit quickly activated the re-evaluation protocol, officially reopening the Chloe Russell file after nearly 4 decades in storage. The first step was to retrieve all sealed physical evidence and investigative documents from 1982 to 1984. The storage boxes were removed from Shelf 4, Unsolved Cases section, and each seal was checked against the original log to ensure no discrepancies or damage. Evidence was transferred to a dedicated processing room for digitization preparation, including crime scene photos, witness statement transcripts, soil and material samples collected at the tire track location, neighborhood maps marked with suspect movement directions, lists of Bronco vehicles without alibis, and the initial investigation summary report. Digitization was performed to modern standards. All paper documents were scanned at high resolution, each page assigned a new identifier code, and linked to the original evidence code to prevent confusion. Old film-based crime scene photos were processed with software to enhance quality, restoring contrast and details limited by 1980s technology. Hand-drawn maps, timelines, and investigative notes were also converted to digital data, enabling the task force to use spatial analysis software to reconstruct suspect routes based on recorded scene data. During this process, many details that seemed faint initially were now clearer through magnification and light processing, especially photos of tire tracks at the road edge and child footprints. After completing digitization, The cold case unit began recontacting surviving witnesses. The 1982 witness list was cross-checked with current resident records to identify those still in the area. Some elderly witnesses had passed away, but many others remained in Charleston or nearby regions. The investigation team first contacted Mr. Daniels, who had seen the green vehicle twice on the morning of the incident. Despite over 40 years passing, he still clearly remembered the sensation of the vehicle driving unusually slowly. No new details emerged, but his confirmation reinforced the consistency of the original statement. Witness Amy, then a 9-year-old girl, now middle-aged, was recontacted regarding the vehicle's parking position at the corner. Though memories had faded, she still recalled the vehicle parking quickly and leaving quickly, matching the file assessment. Other witnesses, such as Miss Collins and the 2 children playing near the curb, were also traced, though some had moved states. Those located were re-interviewed under modern forensic interview protocols, allowing evaluation of memory consistency and distinction between original details and later formed inferences. Parallel to re-examining witnesses, the cold case unit began applying new forensic technologies to old data. First was digital image processing. Tire and footprint photos were entered into pattern analysis software, enabling comparison with thousands of digitized vintage tire samples in national databases. Though the original tracks were faint and incomplete, the software identified certain tire size and vehicle type characteristics, reinforcing the conclusion that the suspect vehicle was highly likely a Ford Bronco or similar SUV from 1975-1981. GIS technology was applied to reconstruct possible suspect movement based on the estimated 10-15 minutes post-departure. Simulation data showed the suspect could have avoided major intersections, turning onto side roads before merging onto routes leading out of Charleston, consistent with the K9 track loss at the intersection. For the 1982 soil and asphalt material samples, modern forensic labs conducted mineralogical and chemical analysis. Some trace minerals in the soil were identified as common in the Russell home area, but yielded no stronger conclusions due to lack of suspect vehicle samples for comparison. However, advanced infrared spectroscopy and electron microscopy helped reconfirm that the vehicle departed in a north-northeast direction, matching witness statements. Audio processing technology was not applicable due to no recordings from that era, but text recovery techniques were used to clarify faded or blurred investigative notes, enabling more accurate reconstruction of 1982 investigator actions. Finally, the entire new 2022 DNA data was attached to the digitized file, marking the case reopening event. This was the first time the case had direct confirmatory evidence, providing the basis for the cold case unit to advance the file to comprehensive re-evaluation under modern forensic standards. After the cold case unit completed the digitization of records and confirmed the legal validity of the 2022 DNA results, the critical next step was to clearly identify the 46-year-old woman who used the name Anna Carson but had no birth record, identification, or valid documents in the entire federal system. Identifying an individual who had lived outside the administrative system for over 4 decades required investigators to trace the fragmentary traces recorded in previous years, cash payment receipts, scattered hospital records, and unofficial residency data. First, investigators reviewed all addresses that appeared in hospital documents from Asheville and surrounding areas from the 1990s to 2010. This list included 4 weekly rental homes and several cheap motels that did not keep long-term records. When visiting each address, investigators interviewed landlords or residents in the area to verify who had lived there. Most of their memories were vague due to the long passage of time, but some landlords still remembered a quiet woman who always paid in cash, had no visitors, and rarely left the house except to buy essentials. These descriptions matched the hospital records, noting reserved behavior, refusal to provide personal information, and avoidance of questions about relatives. Next, the investigation team tracked down purchase receipts under the name Carson from grocery and household goods stores in 3 states: Tennessee, Kentucky, and North Carolina. Although store systems from that era did not retain digital data, some remaining paper receipts in archives were cross-referenced with store codes, dates, and items to determine spending habits. These receipts showed that the woman named Carson typically bought essential items, with no products related to children, no items indicating high income, and no signs of participation in social activities or service purchases. This reinforced the assessment that she lived in a minimal self-sufficiency mode, without relying on welfare systems and leaving no trace in any regulatory agency. Investigators also traced medical services that had recorded the name Carson. Some community clinics still retained paper records noting estimated age, symptoms, and cash payments. These visits were not linked chronologically, but when arranged by year, the records revealed a steady migration pattern: Tennessee in the late 1980s, Kentucky in the early 1990s, and North Carolina from the mid-1990s onward. This perfectly matched Earl Whitaker's movement cycle and helped strengthen the assumption that the woman in the DNA records was the one Whitaker had kept with him for decades. From there, investigators began building an administrative profile of Anna Carson, a woman born around the early 1980s, with no educational records, no identification documents, no formal employment history, and no appearance in any population database of the states where she had lived. These characteristics perfectly fit the pattern of an individual raised outside the system from childhood. When cross-referencing the DNA results showing a high match with the Russell family, investigators proceeded to age matching. Based on the 1982 disappearance in 2022, Chloe Russell's age if alive would be approximately 46, matching the estimated biological age of the person named Carson. To further support the assessment, the investigation team searched for any identifying marks in prior medical records. A 1993 visit in North Carolina noted old scar on left wrist. The Russell family had reported in 1982 records that Chloe had a small scar from a fall at age 3. Although this could not be considered sole evidence, the match provided supportive value in the identification process. Investigators continued expanding the trace by interviewing people who had worked with Carson in seasonal jobs. They described her as quiet, never sharing personal information, always avoiding questions about hometown or family, and not using any documents when applying for work. Some recalled that she always used cash and had no personal vehicle, matching the pattern of living under Whitaker's prior control. When all data was compiled, the investigation team developed a formal suspect profile. The legal identity of Anna Carson likely did not exist, and this woman was in fact an individual separated from the system from early life. Thanks to the DNA results, genetic links to the Russell family, and matches in movement patterns with Whitaker, the agency established a suspected identity. Anna Carson was highly likely Chloe Russell, the victim abducted in 1982 and missing for 40 years without leaving administrative traces. After establishing the suspected identity that Anna Carson was highly likely Chloe Russell, the cold case unit moved to the identification interview step to directly assess the degree of match between the current person and the 1982 missing person file. First, the investigation team built a comparative identity dossier consisting of 3 main data groups: biological data, behavioral data, and contextual data. The original 1982 file was digitized and reconstructed, including Chloe's medical information at age 3, physical descriptions provided by the family, photos taken before the disappearance, reports of the old wrist scar, and behavioral notes from community caregivers at the time. To prepare for the interview, the team pre-compared Anna Carson's physical factors based on 1990s and 2000s hospital records, confirming adult height around 5'3" inches, consistent with predicted height from growth charts for children born 1980, 1981. Other anatomical features, such as facial bone structure, arm-length ratio, and left wrist scar position, were cross-referenced with the Russell family's 1982 descriptions. Although absolute matching was impossible due to the long time elapsed, these features were sufficient to classify as highly compatible. When starting the first interview, investigators focused on collecting Anna Carson's statements about early life memories, not to lead but to assess spontaneity of information. The victim described that she had no clear memories before age 7 or 8, and only knew that from her earliest memories, she had lived with a man, later identified as Whitaker, in wooden houses or rentals in eastern states. When asked about memories related to South Carolina, or any images of the ocean, swamps, or coastal climate, she hesitated before saying, "I have a feeling I once lived in a place that was more humid and hot, but could not confirm if it was a real memory or fleeting image." This matched Chloe's file, who spent her early years in Charleston in a distinctive coastal environment. Next, the team assessed memory of social environment. Anna stated she never attended school, never had peers as friends, and was illiterate until her teens, because that man wouldn't allow it. These factors aligned with investigation data indicating the victim was likely kept outside the education system from childhood. When asked about the left wrist scar, she said she only remembered falling once as a little kid, but had no specific recollection of circumstances. The Russell family had detailed a similar injury when Chloe was 3, and although the victim's memory was unclear, the scar's existence remained a valuable sign. In the behavioral assessment section, investigators noted several notable traits: tendency to avoid eye contact, limited expressiveness, defensive reflexes when asked about guardians, and anxiety when mentioning the concept of family. These signs were not conclusive but consistent with the pattern of a victim in prolonged controlled and socially isolated environment from childhood. Concurrent with the interview, the team cross-referenced Anna Carson's life path with the 1982 historical context. Data showed Anna appearing in Tennessee in 1984, coinciding with Whitaker's disappearance from his last known Kentucky address. The period from 1982 to 1984, with no data, fit the hypothesis that the victim was taken from South Carolina and re-identified in a controlled environment. When overlaying the victim's timeline on Whitaker's travel timeline, all milestones matched with no significant deviations, a factor of great weight in identification investigation. Investigators also compared Anna's facial appearance with 1982 photos of Chloe using biometric facial recognition technology. Although the original photos were only of a 3-year-old, facial aging simulation software allowed comparison with current images. Analysis results showed a 78% match rate, high for cases spanning 40 years without intermediate photos. The next evaluated factor was statement consistency. Throughout interviews, Anna consistently described having no documents, no schooling, and no permission to contact strangers. Each time investigators probed deeper into early life, the victim reacted with stress but did not change her account, indicating not a fabricated story, but faded prolonged memories due to living conditions. This consistency fit the picture of a child separated from family and living in isolation for over 4 decades. When synthesizing all interview results, biological data, behavioral data, and contextual data, the investigation team assessed the compatibility level between Anna Carson and Chloe Russell's 1982 missing person file. Key factors identified included DNA match at direct relative level with the Russell family, biological age matching Chloe's birth year, scar matching family description, movement pattern matching Whitaker's journey, vague memories of coastal environment, and behavior consistent with prolonged isolation victim. Based on comprehensive synthesis, the cold case unit concluded that the compatibility level reached the very high probability threshold, sufficient to classify Anna Carson as highly likely the 1982 missing victim, and sufficient basis to proceed to final legal and investigative verification. After the identification interview and behavioral analysis, results showed very high compatibility between Anna Carson and Chloe Russell's file. The cold case unit moved to the forensic verification step, which was decisive for establishing official identity. First, the team requested additional biological samples for in-depth DNA analysis, including maternal line testing, sibling match, and high-resolution autosomal DNA. The maternal sample was compared with DNA data from Russell family maternal relatives who had participated in genealogy testing in prior years. Results showed Anna Carson's mtDNA sequence fully matching the recorded haplogroup in the Russell family, including 3 characteristic variants, appearing only in one unique family branch. Since mtDNA is passed from mother to child with minimal change across generations, this result strongly reinforced the hypothesis that the victim belonged to the same maternal line as the Russell family and could not be outside this bloodline. Next, high-resolution autosomal DNA testing was conducted, beyond the initial genealogy level. At this level, over 700,000 genetic markers were compared with samples from living family members. After completing DNA testing, the forensic team continued examining childhood medical traces recorded in the 1982 missing person file. The original file noted Chloe fell at age 3, creating a small but rare positioned scar, a slightly curved segment on the underside of the left wrist, less than 1 inch long. When compared, Anna Carson's left wrist scar had nearly identical shape, position, and size, though faded over time. Expert analysis determined morphological similarity at a high threshold, meaning the chance of 2 identical scars occurring randomly was very low. Hospital records also noted Chloe had mild pneumonia at age 2, leaving a characteristic mark in lung tissue structure. Current X-rays of Anna Carson revealed small scar tissue in the exact position, an astonishing match with the old file information. This was considered strong clinical supporting confirmation, though DNA remained decisive. Next, the forensic unit examined fingerprints. Children in South Carolina in the early 1980s were not required to have identification fingerprints, but the Russell family participated in a 1981 community safety program where Chloe's faint fingerprints were taken on a paper card kept at home. This card was submitted in 1982 and stored in the case file. Although child fingerprints often lack clarity due to biology, the forensic lab used image enhancement techniques and child-to-adult fingerprint matching algorithms developed in the 2010 S for long-term missing cases. After processing, 3 characteristic points on Chloe's prints were identified: a bifurcation near the edge, an off-axis ridge ending, and a 3-ridge island cluster. When compared with Anna Carson's fingerprints, the lab found these 3 points persisted in corresponding positions despite changes in shape and spacing due to growth. The data showed that Whitaker left South Carolina immediately after the abduction, moving northwest before appearing in Tennessee in 1984. This was the largest data gap period, but could be reconstructed through the alignment of Whitaker's and Anna Carson's appearances in subsequent years. In the 1980s, the forensic map revealed 3 main residence areas for the perpetrator: eastern Tennessee, southern Kentucky, and the western edge of North Carolina. These points were marked by chains of cash payment receipts, minor mechanical services, and 2 victim medical records. The constant shifting between these areas indicated a movement pattern aimed at avoiding administrative traces, typically occurring every 3-6 months, and never establishing long-term community relationships. The investigation team determined that Whitaker chose small towns with sparse populations, where cash rentals did not require identification documents and failing to enroll a child in school could easily be concealed. Moving into the 1990s, the forensic map continued to expand with more temporary stops, particularly in Kentucky. During this period, Whitaker began having more transactions related to equipment repairs, indicating he took on more seasonal jobs to sustain their life. This created additional archive traces, helping the investigation team determine the route by year with relative accuracy. The victim's movement footprint in this period completely overlapped with the perpetrator's path, from cheap motels to small rental homes, showing that the victim was never separated from Whitaker's control. By the mid-1990s, the data began to concentrate heavily in the mountainous region of North Carolina, where Anna Carson appeared multiple times in low-cost medical records. This was also the area where Whitaker lived the longest in any prior period, lasting about 4-5 years, consistent with the operational pattern of individuals seeking isolation to maintain control over a victim. The investigation team determined that Whitaker selected areas where frequent movement did not draw attention and where population management systems were not strict. Entering the 2000s, the forensic map showed a gradual reduction in Whitaker's movement. Both Whitaker and the victim appeared primarily around Asheville, North Carolina. Numerous purchase receipts, tool repair transactions, and hospital records matched this area, indicating they lived relatively stably throughout the 2000-2008 period. This was when the victim began appearing more in public service systems, though still minimally, due to health conditions and adulthood requiring more contact with the healthcare system. However, this contact still did not reveal her true identity because the victim never used identification documents and always provided information under the name Carson. The 2010s marked a period with less data on Whitaker as he was older and moved less. Some minor repair receipts and grocery transactions still appeared, but the movement range narrowed to a small radius around the North Carolina mountains. The investigation team assessed that the perpetrator maintained control over the victim through social isolation and economic dependence. The forensic map for this decade had fewer marked points, but high accuracy due to coordinated regional bank data, hospital records, and informal residence declarations. After reconstructing the life path of Whitaker and the victim, the investigation team proceeded to the final step, comparing the 40-year journey with data from areas that had recorded missing children during the same period, to screen for the possibility that the perpetrator was involved in other cases. The investigation team compiled lists of missing children from the 3 states where the victim had lived, Tennessee, Kentucky, and North Carolina, and cross-referenced them with the times and locations of Whitaker's residences in each period. The analysis results showed some weak location, time overlaps, but no direct or indirect evidence linking Whitaker to any other missing persons cases. Most overlapping cases occurred in densely populated areas where the perpetrator only stayed for a few weeks, insufficient to conclude a connection. However, this comparison helped reinforce the assessment that Whitaker's movement pattern had a single purpose: maintaining control over Chloe and avoiding any oversight by authorities rather than seeking additional victims. When the forensic map was completed, the 40-year journey of the victim and perpetrator was reconstructed with the highest possible accuracy, creating an important foundation for subsequent investigation steps. After reconstructing the 40-year journey of the perpetrator and victim, the cold case unit moved to the step of analyzing the crime motive to clarify the reasons why Earl Whitaker committed the 1982 abduction and maintained absolute control over Chloe for 4 decades. The first step in this analysis process was to review all data on Whitaker's life before 1982 to identify personal losses that could have influenced his psychology and behavior. From military records, residence records, and some medical notes, the investigation team determined that Whitaker had experienced 2 significant events: the death of his wife and newborn daughter in the late 1970s, and severe psychological decline after discharge from the military. Military records noted he suffered from PTSD, difficulty reintegrating, and a tendency toward isolation from the community. The daughter's death was confirmed through 1977 hospital documents, which clearly stated the infant died shortly after birth due to respiratory complications. This event was considered the greatest loss in Whitaker's life and was described by his family as the time he became withdrawn, quiet, and emotionally uncontrollable. When cross-referencing Whitaker's behaviors with the psychological model of replacement child, a state in which an individual attempts to replace the image of a lost child with another child, the investigation team found clear matches. First, the timing of Chloe's abduction coincided with the period when Whitaker was living alone and showing many signs of psychological crisis. Second, the behaviors after the abduction demonstrated a tendency to recreate a private family model in which the victim was kept completely isolated from the outside world, akin to a replacement for the lost child. The replacement child model often involves absolute control, restricted social contact, and efforts to maintain the victim's dependence on the perpetrator, all of which were clearly present in Whitaker's and Chloe's journey. When tracing additional local records in Tennessee and Kentucky, the investigation team discovered some reports of Whitaker approaching children in the late 1970s and early 1980s, but none led to criminal charges. These behaviors aligned with a pattern of seeking replacement attachment rather than sexually oriented violence, as there were no elements of threat or assault in the reports. This reinforced the hypothesis that Whitaker's motive was not impulsive violence, but a psychologically deviant act stemming from personal loss and a need for control. Another factor evaluated was that Whitaker's residence and movement pattern did not match the behavior of a repeat offender. Serial offenders often tend to return to familiar areas or seek victims in similar circumstances. In this case, Whitaker always moved in an evasive pattern, never staying too long in any one place, and showing no signs of contact with other children besides the victim. When compared with missing children data from Tennessee, Kentucky, and North Carolina during the same period, the investigation team found no significant matches with legal value to link Whitaker to other disappearances. Although there were some weak time and location overlaps, there were no witnesses, physical evidence, or behavioral descriptions matching Whitaker's movement pattern. Additionally, the characteristics of the replacement child model typically lead to exclusive focus on one replacement victim rather than seeking multiple victims. Investigators also considered the possibility that Whitaker had economic motives or committed the crime for exploitation purposes, but financial data showed no evidence supporting this hypothesis. He lived in low economic conditions, did not receive government assistance, and did not attempt to exploit the victim for profit. This indicated that the abduction was not financially motivated, but stemmed from psychological need. When evaluating all the data, the cold case unit concluded that Whitaker's motive fit the replacement child model combined with untreated PTSD and severe personal life loss. This factor explains why the perpetrator could maintain control over the victim for 40 years without signs of serious physical harm or abusive behavior for other purposes. However, his maintenance of isolation and prevention of the victim's social contact for such a prolonged time was assessed as prolonged psychological harm with coercive characteristics. From these analyses, the investigation team concluded that the likelihood of Whitaker committing multiple crimes was low. His goal appeared to focus solely on filling the void from losing his child, and the abduction of Chloe was a one-time act, prolonged only by the need for replacement rather than repeated criminal impulse. After completing the crime motive analyses and establishing the psychological context of Earl Whitaker, the cold case unit moved to one of the most important and sensitive steps in the entire case file, notifying the Russell family of the confirmed victim identity. This was a process requiring absolute accuracy, strict adherence to legal procedures, and simultaneous handling of the profound emotional aspects for a family that had waited over 40 years in a state of not knowing whether their child was alive or dead. First, the investigation team compiled a complete report including all DNA test results, forensic comparisons, behavioral analysis, journey reconstruction, and official identity conclusion. The report was structured into 3 levels: scientific data, identification data, and contextual data. Each part was reviewed by the legal department and independent forensic experts to ensure that the identity conclusion was not only accurate, but also had sufficient legal basis for presentation to the family. After the report was finalized, the cold case unit commander held an internal meeting to determine who would be responsible for contacting the Russell family. Due to the special nature of the case, the final decision was that the notification must be made by the lead investigator and a representative from the Victim Support Office. They had to prepare thoroughly to handle possible reactions from shock, disbelief, to joy mixed with fear after decades without response. The family contact process began with a phone call requesting an in-person meeting in a private setting. The family, now consisting of elderly parents and some extended members, initially thought this was just an annual update or a request for additional records. The cold case unit did not reveal any details over the phone, only stating the need to discuss important information related to the 1982 case. When the official meeting took place, the lead investigator presented according to legal sequence, first confirming that the case had been reopened based on new DNA data, then explaining the verification process, comparison methods, and the entire forensic system used. This was to help the family understand that the conclusion was not based on speculation, but on scientific evidence with the highest reliability. After the explanation, the investigation team presented the conclusion: the DNA of the woman known as Anna Carson matched completely with Chloe Russell, their daughter. This moment was recorded in internal minutes as one of the most profound emotional reactions in any cold case file. The district had handled. The family initially fell silent, followed by shock and disbelief. They were provided with a condensed copy of the forensic report to review key evidence: matching mtDNA sequence, autosomal analysis, achieving direct lineage match, wrist scar, fingerprints, lung tissue markers, and full timeline compatibility. As this data was presented, initial skepticism gradually faded, replaced by intense emotion when they heard that Chloe, the one they had searched for over 40 years, was still alive. After the family confirmed they understood and agreed with the conclusion, the investigation team moved to the next part, preparing for reunification. This step required coordination between the cold case unit, victim support office, psychological experts, and legal support agencies. First, the family was informed that the victim was currently living under the name Anna Carson and did not have stable legal documents. Importantly, the reunification process had to occur in stages to avoid shock or psychological pressure on the victim, who had experienced 4 decades in an isolated environment and had no knowledge of her true identity. The family was explained that Chloe had no clear memories of her early childhood and might struggle to accept information about her origins. Therefore, any meeting had to take place in a controlled environment with psychological experts present for support. Next, the cold case unit prepared a curated set of photos, documents, and family information to help the victim gradually recognize the connection. This set included photos of Chloe at age 3, family photos from the early 1980s, a recording of the mother's voice from a 1983 interview, and preserved family items. Each document was reviewed to ensure that when shared with the victim, it would not cause excessive emotional pressure. The final step in preparation was determining a neutral location for the first meeting, ensuring the victim would not be overwhelmed and the family would not face an overly heavy psychological situation. The investigation team coordinated with psychological experts to build a step-by-step plan, from sharing light information to the first meeting, then subsequent meetings, if the victim felt safe. When the meeting ended, the Russell family embraced in tears. For the first time in 40 years, they had real hope that Chloe was still alive and had a chance to return to the family's arms. After all preparations for the meeting were completed, the cold case unit, in coordination with psychological experts, organized the reunion between the victim and the Russell family in a dedicated contact room at the Charleston Police Department, a space designed to ensure privacy, emotional safety, and the ability to observe behavior without pressuring any party. The identification process was divided into multiple stages to avoid overwhelming the victim, who had lived more than 4 decades in isolation and had never been exposed to the concept of her biological family. In the initial stage, the victim, still introduced by the name she was familiar with, Anna, was brought into the room first. The psychological experts engaged in gentle conversation to help her stabilize emotionally before meeting the group of people she had no memory of. She displayed clear confusion mixed with anxiety upon learning that she was about to face her biological family, whom she had no recollection of and did not even know she had. Meanwhile, the Russell family, consisting of the parents, 2 cousins, and an aunt, were instructed to sit in the adjacent room and were strictly advised to restrain their emotions in the initial minutes, as the victim might react strongly to displays of emotion. When the time came, the door opened, and Anna entered cautiously, her posture reserved and eyes fixed on the floor. The Russell parents instinctively stood up, but were signaled by the experts with subtle gestures to remain calm. That moment was described in the report as an overlap of 40 years of loss and hope, with the 2 sides standing just a few feet apart, yet separated by an entire shattered lifetime. The lead investigator began the identification by introducing each family member, not with emotion but with basic information, so the victim would not feel immediate pressure to connect. Anna looked up, her gaze scrutinizing each face, but she could not link them to any memories. However, the experts noted a significant point. Instead of panicking or retreating, as she had in many other stressful interactions, Anna stood still, listened, and responded with receptive silence, a signal that she did not reject their presence. In the second step, the family was allowed to present several keepsakes: a photo of Chloe at age 3, a small scarf still kept in the closet since 1982, and a family album. When the photo was placed on the table, Anna leaned in to look more closely. She showed no sign of recognition, but she lightly touched the edge of the photo, then unconsciously brought her left hand to her wrist, the exact location of the scar that forensics had confirmed. The family said nothing, but this unconscious action was noted by the experts as a manifestation of a latent emotional connection to the childhood image. Next, the investigator employed a behavioral and gestural identification method, a psychological technique used in long-delayed reunions. Chloe's mother was asked to perform certain movements she had routinely done with her daughter as a child, placing a hand on her chest when anxious, tilting her head slightly when listening, and smiling faintly at the corner of her mouth when reassuring. Upon witnessing these gestures, Anna reacted unusually. She furrowed her brow and stared intently at the woman's face, as if trying to grasp something rising from faint memories. The shift in her eyes, from confusion to deep focus, was considered by the investigation team an important signal, as it demonstrated that familiar gestures could activate buried memory fragments from early childhood. The experts then suggested that Chloe's father speak a few slow sentences. He repeated the exact lullaby he had used to soothe his daughter to sleep in 1982. On the third second of the lullaby, Anna clenched her hands and slightly lifted her head, a reaction the experts described as an auditory memory emotional match. Although she could not express it in words, physiological signs such as changes in breathing and pupil dilation indicated that her body recognized the sound at a preconscious level. The next step in the identification involved comparing communication behaviors. The family was permitted to ask very short questions without strong memory prompts. Chloe's mother asked, "Do you remember anyone ever calling you by an affectionate name?" Anna did not answer immediately, but after a few seconds she softly said, "I once heard someone call me CLO, but I don't know if it was real or if I imagined it." This was a particularly valuable detail, as CLO was the private nickname the family used for Chloe and had never been publicized in any documents. Upon hearing this, the room nearly froze, but thanks to strict guidance, the family did not react overly strongly to avoid frightening the victim. In the final comparison stage, the investigator presented the forensic results in front of the victim: DNA match, fingerprint comparison, scar alignment, and lung tissue. The investigation team explained that this data was not intended to pressure her, but to help her understand that identity confirmation was not based on anyone's wishes, but on scientific fact. Upon hearing that her DNA matched her mother's at the direct relative level, Anna bowed her head, her hands tightly clasped together. This was the moment she first became aware that her life had been severed from its roots since childhood, and that the people before her were not just strangers, but those who had waited for her for 40 years. By the end of the session, the investigation team recorded that the identification level reached the threshold of comprehensive affirmation based on 3 groups of criteria: scientific, behavioral, gestural, and contextual memory. The meeting concluded when the victim voluntarily said, "I want to know more about you all." That short, almost whispered statement was recorded in the report as the final verification sign that the victim accepted the connection with the Russell family. The first reunion ended in a transitional state, not with explosive emotion, not rushed, but containing the profound truth that the 40-year gap had been bridged by science, memory, and the patience of people who had waited for a miracle. Following the initial reunion, the cold case unit conducted in-depth interviews with the victim to thoroughly review all genuine memories, fragmented pieces, and those distorted by her prolonged isolated environment. The interviews were conducted using the memory scaffolding method, meaning no direct suggestions were made, but a framework was created for the victim to reconstruct childhood memory fragments herself. In the early sessions, Anna, now aware of her true identity as Chloe, stated that her earliest memory involved the feeling of being in a small house with dim yellow light and the heavy footsteps of the man she only called him. When asked about other sounds, she said she sometimes heard waves or whistling wind, as if from an open area, but was unsure if it was a real memory or imagination from childhood. The investigation team noted this as consistent with the coastal Charleston setting in 1982. Another memory emerged when she described being placed in a vehicle, recalling the shaking and loud engine noise. She did not remember the time or destination, but clearly recalled the man always instructing her not to look out the window. This matched Whitaker's behavior described in early residency data, where he minimized the victim's exposure to the outside environment. When asked about a moment before age 7, the victim sometimes furrowed her brow, trying to connect but unable to articulate it. However, she described a very specific image: a pair of light blue children's shoes. The investigator cross-referenced this with the Russell family file, where Chloe's mother had reported that her daughter loved a pair of blue shoes she bought in the summer of 1982. This was a rare and valuable match, as no public document recorded this detail. Beyond consistent memories, many of the victim's recollections were distorted by the prolonged control environment under Whitaker. At times, she firmly stated he had cared for her since birth, but in later interviews, said she might have met someone before him. This contradiction was assessed by experts as the result of Whitaker deliberately suggesting false information over many years. In another memory, she thought she had gone to school in a small room, but after psychological analysis, experts determined this was confusion between memory and times she saw children going to school when he drove past towns. Many other memories of long trips by car were intertwined across different periods, making it impossible for the victim to distinguish the initial ones. The cold case unit recorded all these distorted memory fragments for overall assessment, while separating details inconsistent with forensic data or the reconstructed timeline. A key aspect of the interview process was determining whether anyone else had significant contact with the victim over the 40-year journey. Chloe stated that during her time with Whitaker, she almost never met outsiders except when he took her to stores or clinics. When asked if anyone else cared for her or lived in the house, she said she sometimes heard a woman's voice talking, but was unsure if it was real or from the radio. The cold case unit reviewed Whitaker's residency history for that period and found no evidence of any woman living with him. Thus, this memory was classified as unverifiable and not used as a basis for further pursuit. Additionally, Chloe described a few times when Whitaker disappeared for several days, leaving her alone with a lock on the outside of the door. This was an important detail, as it indicated the perpetrator had separate travel cycles unrelated to the victim. The cold case unit cross-referenced these periods with missing children data in Tennessee and Kentucky, but found no connections. Nevertheless, experts retained the detail for broader assessment of Whitaker's criminal behavior. When asked about Whitaker's behavior or statements suggesting another perpetrator's involvement, the victim replied that he often said, "It's just the two of us," and never mentioned anyone else. She had never seen weapons, was not detained under threat, and showed no signs of anyone else managing or controlling her. The investigation team assessed that no data indicated the presence of an accomplice. The final details reviewed involved items, symbols, or locations described by the victim. Chloe remembered a wooden house with a slanted roof and a tall pine tree in front, matching an address where Whitaker resided in Tennessee in 1985. She also recalled the smell of machine oil, which aligned perfectly with Whitaker's longtime equipment repair occupation. These points reinforced the reconstructed timeline without creating new contradictions. After compiling all genuine memories, fragmented memories, and distorted memory, the cold case unit prepared a report concluding that the majority of information provided by the victim aligned with the investigation file, showed no signs of a second perpetrator, and contained no data indicating unreported criminal details. Thus, the victim's account became supplementary data confirming the accuracy of the entire reconstructed journey for the 1982 case. After completing the review of the victim's memories and finding no clear signs of a second perpetrator's involvement, the cold case unit nonetheless expanded the accomplice investigation to ensure no possibilities were overlooked that could affect the final conclusion. The first step was cross-referencing the victim's new statements with the entire old witness file from 1982. The team re-examined 6 statements from primary witnesses, reviewing every detail describing the strange man, the Bronco vehicle, and any appearance of a second person in the area. Most initial statements consistently reported only one man present on the morning of the incident, with no witness seeing 2 people in the vehicle or coordinated behavior among multiple individuals. The investigation team combined this with the victim's memories, where she affirmed never seeing anyone besides Whitaker in the early years after being taken from Charleston. The 2 data sources, witnesses and victim, when compared, revealed no contradictions, indicating low likelihood of an accomplice. However, to avoid missing minor details, the team continued focusing on descriptions potentially pointing to a second person. During interviews, the victim had mentioned sometimes hearing a woman's voice, but she herself was unsure if it was real or from the radio. The cold case unit analyzed this forensically. If a woman had lived with Whitaker at any stage, traces might appear in rental records, purchase records, or hospital data. Cross-referencing Whitaker's residency timeline showed no records of him cohabiting with any woman in Tennessee, Kentucky, or North Carolina for more than a few weeks. Some addresses had scattered appearances of other women's names in residency records, but verification showed they were prior or subsequent tenants, not overlapping. Next, the team reviewed 11 residences Whitaker had lived in based on bills and hospital records. For each location, they contacted former landlords, surviving neighbors, and nearby grocery stores to ask if anyone had ever seen a woman or second person with Whitaker. Most responses agreed that Whitaker rarely interacted, lived reclusively, and was usually only seen with a young girl. No one observed him interacting with other adults in a family context. A few mentioned occasionally seeing someone standing outside Whitaker's house, but without clear descriptions, it could not be verified as a visitor, delivery person, or repair worker. Each such note was marked insufficient for inference. The team also expanded checks of police records across 3 states for any reports involving 2 adults with Whitaker. Over more than 40 years, data only showed Whitaker's name alone in minor disturbances or interrogations related to approaching children. No reports noted the presence of another woman or man. Whitaker's repair work records were analyzed to determine if he had long-term collaborators, but data primarily showed he worked alone or on short daily jobs, without fixed partners. Finally, the cold case unit reviewed missing children lists in areas where Whitaker lived to check for patterns suggesting multi-perpetrator crimes. Cross-referencing each case found no matches in vehicle, timing, or behavior with Whitaker. The areas he lived in were mostly sparsely populated, with few child abductions recorded at the same times, and when present, they occurred far from Whitaker's residence or in circumstances inconsistent with his abduction pattern. Based on unified analysis from witnesses, the victim, residency records, and federal data, the cold case unit concluded there was no evidence indicating an accomplice. All data pointed to a single pattern: Whitaker's solitary behavior, driven by personal psychological factors and control needs, rather than a network or organized crime. Nonetheless, all minor unverified notes about sounds or sights were retained in the file as supplementary documents, in case new data emerges in the future. After completing the expanded investigation into possible accomplices and finding no evidence of a second person's involvement, the cold case unit shifted to evaluating the connection between the abduction of Chloe Russell and 2 other child missing cases recorded in Georgia and Tennessee during the 1983-1987 period. This was a critical step to determine whether Whitaker could be linked to a broader pattern of criminal behavior, or if the 1982 incident was an isolated act stemming from personal psychological motives. The first case, reviewed, involved a 6-year-old girl who went missing in Dalton, Georgia, in 1983. Witnesses at the time reported seeing a brown pickup truck and a man wearing a baseball cap driving away from the area. The cold case unit compared this description with Whitaker's vehicle and appearance in 1983. At that time, he was recorded as using an old dark blue Ford Bronco and did not own or rent any pickup truck according to Georgia DMV records. Additionally, residency data showed that Whitaker lived in Tennessee throughout 1983, with no evidence confirming travel to Georgia during the time of the girl's disappearance. More importantly, the witness description of the man involved in the Dalton case indicated a height and build that did not match Whitaker's physical characteristics at that time. All these factors led to the assessment that Whitaker's involvement in the Dalton case was low. The second case concerned a 5-year-old boy who went missing in Knoxville, Tennessee in 1987. The child was last seen playing near the motel where his family was temporarily staying. Witnesses described a middle-aged man with graying hair approaching the boy before leaving in a dark-colored off-road vehicle. Upon analysis, the cold case unit noted that this case had some superficial similarities to descriptions of Whitaker, particularly regarding the vehicle type and age. However, when cross-referencing residency timelines, employment records, and expense receipts, the investigators confirmed that Whitaker lived in North Carolina throughout 1987. With no signs of travel to Knoxville, investigators also checked rental records and repair bills from that period to ensure Whitaker had no extended absences, and the results showed he remained in the Asheville area during the relevant time frame. Regarding the modus operandi, the Knoxville case had a key detail inconsistent with Whitaker's typical behavior. The victim was a boy. All data on Whitaker indicated a strong attachment to the image of his deceased daughter, fitting the replacement child pattern, with no evidence that he ever approached boys or had motives extending to the other gender. Another significant difference was the location of the abduction. The Knoxville incident occurred in a densely populated area, whereas Whitaker always chose sparsely populated places, avoiding attention and maintaining a reclusive lifestyle to keep the victim isolated. This made Whitaker's behavior incompatible with the Knoxville context, which took place in a residential area with heavy foot traffic. The cold case unit also reviewed old Tennessee police records to assess the suspect in the Knoxville case. One witness described the man as having a Midwestern accent, while Whitaker was born and raised on the East Coast, with a distinctive Appalachian accent easily distinguishable from a Midwestern one. This was a key linguistic factor in the exclusion process. To ensure no details were overlooked, the investigative team created a multi-level comparison table between the Dalton and Knoxville disappearances and Whitaker's behavior, target characteristics, vehicle, location, accent, timing, relationship to the area, travel patterns, and access to victims. The comparison results showed that neither case met 3 or more criteria simultaneously to be linked to Whitaker. A significant part of the evaluation was analyzing Whitaker's behavior after abducting Chloe. Both the forensic timeline and the victim's statements indicated he maintained tight control, with no signs of seeking additional victims. Moreover, the need to constantly relocate to conceal Chloe's existence made it difficult for him to carry out further abductions. Investigators also considered the psychological cycles of serial offenders, who often show signs of escalation or repeated attack patterns over time. In contrast, Whitaker's behavior demonstrated long-term stability, with no evidence of escalation or experimenting with new methods. The investigative team concluded that Whitaker's 1982 abduction was highly personalized, with clear motives rooted in family loss and psychological disorder, not fitting the opportunistic crime patterns seen in the Dalton and Knoxville cases. Ultimately, both the Georgia and Tennessee cases were assessed by the cold case unit as unrelated, with no evidence indicating Whitaker's involvement in any missing child cases beyond the abduction of Chloe Russell. After completing the evaluation of Whitaker's potential links to the 2 other child disappearances, The cold case unit moved on to a comprehensive analysis of the systemic failures that occurred in 1982, aiming to explain why the Chloe Russell case was not solved in the initial phase and how the perpetrator was able to remove the victim from Charleston without leaving strong enough traces for pursuit. The first step in this evaluation was reviewing the entire crime scene processing procedures from that era. In 1982, local police agencies lacked standardized guidelines for investigating missing children, and most processing steps relied on the direct investigator's experience rather than fixed protocols. At the Russell home scene, the initial responding officers focused primarily on searching for the victim in the surrounding area, resulting in many traces being disturbed before crime scene technicians arrived. The perimeter tape was set up late, and crowd control in the neighborhood was not strictly managed, causing footprints and tire tracks to be overwritten, reducing their later analytical value. Contemporary reports noted that the Bronco tire impressions, the most critical clue, were photographed with low-resolution equipment, making it impossible to determine tread pattern, wear, or precise direction of travel accurately. This was the first systemic failure: lack of specialized equipment and unstandardized scene preservation procedures. Next, the cold case unit analyzed traffic camera data that today could play a pivotal role in tracking vehicles leaving the area. However, in 1982, Charleston had virtually no public camera systems, and key routes like Highway 17, Savannah Highway, or residential exit points were not monitored by recording devices. Even private stores lacked camera systems as the technology was not yet widespread. This made tracing Whitaker's Bronco nearly impossible due to the absence of any visual data to confirm license plates, turns, or departure times. This was considered the second systemic failure: technological gaps preventing the collection of physical evidence on vehicles. In further analyzing vehicle tracing procedures from the 1980s, the cold case unit identified a major vulnerability: cross-referencing lists of Ford Broncos in the area was done manually, based on paper records provided by the DMV. These records were not only delayed, but also outdated, as many vehicles were resold, transferred, or used out of state without new registrations. When investigators compiled a list of Broncos within a 30-mile radius of Charleston, they verified less than 60% of the actual owners. This prolonged the screening process and gave Whitaker the opportunity to remove the victim from the area undetected. Additionally, vehicle cross-referencing procedures at the time did not include behavioral pattern analysis of drivers, frequent routes, or criminal psychology factors, limiting vehicle searches to administrative checks rather than real risk assessments. This was the third systemic failure: loose vehicle tracing procedures, lacking verification tools, and interstate coordination. Another critical systemic factor was that the United States in 1982 had no national alert system for missing children. Amber Alert did not exist until 1996, and there was no mechanism for rapid information dissemination across federal lines. When Chloe disappeared, case information was only circulated within Charleston and a few adjacent counties. There were no emergency broadcasts, no suspect descriptions on radio, and no victim photos on highway signs. This created a critical time window for the perpetrator, allowing him to cross state lines without any barriers. Many later investigators noted that if Amber Alert had existed in 1982, intercepting Whitaker's Bronco at Charleston exit points would have been feasible. This was the fourth systemic failure: lack of an immediate alert mechanism preventing information from spreading quickly enough to support the investigation. Furthermore, the cold case unit assessed that the storage of witness data and physical evidence from that era did not meet standards for long-term investigations. Scene photos were low quality, handwritten reports were illegible, and there were no backups. Many pieces of evidence, such as tire and footprints and timelines, existed only as descriptions without digitized data. This made case files difficult to access after many years, reducing the ability to reopen the case before forensic technology advanced. In the analysis report, the cold case unit also noted systemic improvements over time. First was the creation of Amber Alert enabling nationwide emergency signals within minutes of a child abduction report. Second was the deployment of traffic cameras, commercial cameras, and home security systems, making vehicle tracing easier for authorities. Third was advancements in forensic technology, DNA, enhanced fingerprint analysis, facial reconstruction, genealogical data, all factors that help solve the Chloe Russell case after 40 years. Finally, child abduction investigation procedures were standardized nationally, with detailed guidelines on scene lockdown, witness interviews, evidence collection, and federal coordination. Looking back at the full 1982 systemic picture, the cold case unit concluded that Chloe's disappearance was hindered not by lack of effort from investigators, but because the United States at that time lacked the tools, procedures, and technology needed to counter a calculated abduction like Whitaker's. These gaps extended the 40-year period to recover the victim. The identification of Chloe Russell after 40 years and the official conclusion of the abduction case created a strong wave of reactions in the Charleston community, where memories of the 1982 disappearance lingered like a wound that had never truly healed. News that the victim was alive spread rapidly, not only due to the miraculous element, but also because many locals had participated in the searches that year and were now unexpectedly witnessing a resolution they dared not hope for. Many older residents shared that Chloe's return was a moment that brought back memories of those long nights, when the entire neighborhood took to the streets with flashlights, believing they could find the little girl within a few blocks. Now her being found alive became a symbol of perseverance and faith in justice, creating a deeply emotional atmosphere in the Charleston community. Alongside the emotion, the case closure also raised serious questions about child safety and the community's readiness to respond to emergencies. Many parents admitted they had viewed the Chloe case as simply a consequence of an era when everyone was more relaxed, with children allowed to play freely without close supervision. But discovering a planned abduction by a lone individual made many realize that risks exist even in the most peaceful communities. Community meetings were held shortly after the case resolution announcement, focusing on explaining how modern child protection procedures had improved compared to the shortcomings of 1982. Schools in the district also proactively organized talks with parents, emphasizing the importance of constant supervision, teaching children how to handle approaches by strangers, and encouraging parents to stay updated on emergency information for support when needed. In the weeks following the case announcement, Charleston saw a significant increase in community training classes on risk recognition and emergency response. Nonprofit organizations focused on child protection reported a sharp rise in volunteer registrations, reflecting a clear shift in societal awareness. For many, Chloe's story proved that vigilance is never excessive and that a united community can make a difference in investigation outcomes. No matter how much time has passed, the case's impact was not limited to Charleston, but extended to families with missing children across the southeastern United States. As media coverage intensively reported Chloe's discovery after 40 years, many families in similar situations expressed renewed hope. Calls to missing persons family support hotlines surged. Many inquired whether modern forensic technology could be applied to their children's cases. Organizations like NSEMEC noted a significant increase in requests to review old files, particularly from families with children missing from the 1970s, 1990s, when investigations relied heavily on manual methods. Chloe being found alive became a tremendous source of encouragement, proving that a seemingly hopeless case could still be solved with sufficient technology and investigative effort. For these families, the story was not just a miracle, but a reminder that continuing the search has meaning, even when time seems to erase all traces. Numerous families directly contacted the cold case unit to inquire about reopening procedures, and many police departments in the region received requests for new DNA comparisons from relatives of missing victims. Additionally, the case resolution led to changes in how communities view the responsibility to report unusual behavior. Learning that Whitaker lived reclusively for years yet appeared in small communities in Tennessee and North Carolina, without raising suspicion, prompted residents to question their own role in observing and reporting. Many admitted they previously thought intervening in others' affairs was unnecessary, but Chloe's story proved that a small action or simple report could make a big difference. As a result, Charleston and surrounding counties launched programs to raise community awareness about See Something, Say Something, encouraging residents to respond quickly to unusual signs involving children. The Chloe Russell case, once solved, not only closed a 40-year chapter, but also sparked a wave of change in the community, a change born from the understanding that child safety is a shared responsibility, not just that of families or authorities. From a societal perspective, the case became a prime example of how technology, community, and perseverance can intersect to produce outcomes no one thought possible. After the historic verdict of the investigation was announced and the 1982 disappearance case was officially closed, the next task for the Cold Case Unit and the relevant agencies was to assist Chloe Russell, who had lived for more than 40 years under the name Anna Carson, in entering the phase of rebuilding her own life. This process consisted of three key pillars: legalizing her true identity, providing psychological and social support, and re-establishing family connections. As soon as the legal identity verification was completed, Chloe had to go through an administrative procedure that had never been designed for cases of disappearance lasting 4 decades. The first step was to apply for a reissued birth certificate in South Carolina based on the 1982 records and the forensic conclusions provided by the medical examiner's office. The state's Department of Health and Vital Statistics Agency had to reopen the archived files, create a new birth certificate, and mark the case as identity restored after disappearance. Next, Chloe needed to be issued a Social Security number, something she had never had. This procedure required submitting the new birth certificate, DNA conclusions, and a confirmation from the Charleston police that she was indeed the victim who had been removed from the system at age 3. The process took more than 2 months due to many details needing manual verification, but eventually the paperwork was completed, allowing Chloe to have an official legal record for the first time in her life. After that came the step of applying for an ID or driver's license, which required Chloe to relearn skills that most adults take for granted. Social workers assisted her in enrolling in adult driving classes for those without prior traffic skills, while also helping her become familiar with basic administrative procedures such as opening a bank account, signing a rental agreement, or managing personal expenses. For someone who had lived almost her entire life under control and isolation, this was a major transition, supported by a dedicated team at the Victim Recovery Center. However, legalizing her identity was only part of the journey. The greatest challenge for Chloe came from adapting to society, an environment completely foreign to her. The team of psychological experts assessed that she exhibited characteristics of individuals separated from the community for extended periods, limited communication abilities, strong defensive reflexes, difficulty trusting strangers, and a lack of foundational social knowledge. Therefore, a personalized therapy program was developed around 3 goals: enhancing adaptability, stabilizing emotions, and building independent skills. In the therapy sessions, Chloe began learning to recognize her own emotions, something that had previously been very vague because she had never been encouraged to talk about her feelings or personal needs. The experts also helped her understand that feelings of anxiety and fear when encountering crowds were not abnormal, but natural consequences of her previous living circumstances. In addition to individual therapy, Chloe received social support through life skills guidance sessions. A social worker was assigned to help her learn how to use public transportation, prepare food, maintain personal hygiene, and access healthcare services. Due to her lack of educational foundation, Chloe was introduced to adult education programs where she learned advanced reading and writing skills as well as basic financial knowledge. Each step progressed slowly but steadily, closely monitored to ensure she did not feel overwhelmed. Meanwhile, an equally important part of her new life was re-establishing connections with the Russell family. The reunion could not occur in a conventional way, as more than 40 years of separation had caused emotional shock on both sides. The cold case unit and psychological experts developed a roadmap consisting of 3 phases: supervised meetings, short-duration free contact, and eventually natural family interactions. In the initial meetings, Chloe always had a psychological expert present to help her regulate emotions and guide communication with her parents and relatives. The Russell family was also trained to understand Chloe's psychological boundaries, avoiding pressure or excessive expectations. As the meetings continued, some natural responses began to emerge. Chloe paid more attention to her mother's voice, started asking questions about the family's past life, and sometimes expressed regret over the lost time. Her parents, who had lived 4 decades in a mix of hope and despair, restrained their emotions very well, striving to create a safe environment for their daughter to gradually integrate. Surprisingly, Chloe tended to accept connections with extended relatives more easily than with her parents, perhaps because those ties carried less emotional weight. Meetings with cousins were lighter, focusing on simple activities like walking, looking at old photos, or having dinner in a quiet place. These sessions helped Chloe build a soft support network, gradually making her feel safer when interacting with her parents. Thanks to the persistence of the family and the expert team, Chloe began forming habits of regular contact: short weekly phone calls, voice messages, and later weekend visits. Each time, the distance between Anna, the person who had lived in isolation, and Chloe, the abducted child, narrowed a little more. Additionally, Chloe received legal support to understand her rights as a victim of a decades-long kidnapping. This included the right to temporary financial assistance, the right to long-term psychological counseling, and the right to request protection if needed. Although Chloe faced no current threats, since Whitaker had passed away, providing full information helped her feel safer and more in control of her life. By combining administrative, psychological, and family support, Chloe's life reconstruction process progressed steadily. Even though Chloe Russell's identity had been confirmed, the victim's 40-year journey had been reconstructed relatively completely, and Whitaker's death closed the possibility of prosecution. The case still left many questions that could not be fully answered. The first question, and the biggest one, was whether Whitaker had an accomplice. The cold case unit cross-referenced 1982 witness data, the victim's account, and the perpetrator's residency records over 4 decades, but found no direct evidence of a second person involved. However, some faint memories of Chloe's, such as hearing a woman's voice or sensing someone else in the house when she was very young, could not be fully verified. Experts assessed that these memories might stem from psychological distortion due to prolonged isolation, but the possibility that Whitaker had visitors who were not involved in the kidnapping could not be entirely ruled out. This uncertainty kept the accomplice question open, though the likelihood of direct involvement by a second person was deemed very low. The second question revolved around how Whitaker selected his victim. Based on psychological analysis and the perpetrator's personal background, the investigation team concluded that his motive was tied to the loss of his newborn daughter in the late 1970s. However, the reason he chose Chloe, a little girl living in a peaceful residential area with no notable family circumstances, remained unclear. There was no evidence that he had stalked the Russell family before the abduction day, nor any record of prior contact with children in the neighborhood. This led to 2 hypotheses: either Whitaker selected the victim randomly based on opportunity, a child playing near the road without an adult nearby, or he had observed the area for a short time beforehand, but left no clear traces. With him no longer alive to answer, the motive for victim selection remained forever unverifiable. Another major question concerned gaps in Whitaker's travel timeline, particularly the 1982-1984 period, and some years in the 1990s. These gaps existed due to the perpetrator's isolated lifestyle, using cash, avoiding formal rentals, and moving through sparsely populated areas. Although the cold case unit pieced together most of the journey using receipts, hospital records, and informal residency data. Some segments could not be fully filled. For example, there were nearly 8 months in 1983 with no receipts or medical records related to Whitaker or Chloe. This raised questions: where did they live during that time? Did they interact with anyone, and were there events that left no trace? From an investigative perspective, these gaps did not alter the case's nature, but they prevented the victim's 40-year journey from being reconstructed with absolute precision. The next question concerned the possibility that Whitaker had other victims. Although the cold case unit reviewed missing children cases in Georgia, Tennessee, and North Carolina, no strong evidence linked him to those incidents. However, Whitaker's life across multiple states and frequent moves made it impossible to completely rule out the chance he had approached other children, especially when Chloe was young and he made short trips for work or supplies. Some scattered reports from the 1980s described an older man approaching children in parking lots in Kentucky, but the descriptions were insufficiently detailed and no physical evidence was collected. With modern forensic technology advancements, DNA data from unsolved cases might reveal unexpected links in the future, but at present, there was no basis to suggest Whitaker harmed anyone else besides Chloe. Another question, more societal than legal, was why no one suspected Whitaker over 4 decades despite his living in various places. The answer lay in his extremely reclusive lifestyle, avoiding interaction, choosing rentals without paperwork, limiting appearances in crowded areas, and forming no long-term social relationships. The small, sparse communities he passed through had little oversight from authorities, especially before federal data systems were unified. This raised the question, if societal monitoring had been better back then, might the victim have been found sooner? Finally, there remained an intrinsic question: how much of the past did Chloe truly remember? Although she had recounted scattered memories, it was unclear how many more were locked away or permanently lost due to childhood psychological trauma. Experts noted that memories of a 3-year-old separated from family in shocking circumstances could fade or be replaced by false memories from prolonged isolation. This left the picture of that day, June 13, 1982, missing a piece that only one person could provide, but that person was gone. The Chloe Russell case file, exactly 40 years after the day of her disappearance, has been closed with a conclusion that is rare in the history of child abductions in the United States. The victim is alive, her identity confirmed with comprehensive forensic evidence, and her 4-decade journey reconstructed with a level of precision unprecedented for a case dating back to 1982. This is the moment to summarize the investigative process that spanned 4 decades, a journey that reflects changes in the entire investigative system, forensic technology, and societal awareness. The first decade, from 1982 to the early 1990s, was a period marked by fundamental limitations in investigative methods. When Chloe disappeared, the Charleston police had to rely on intuition, witness statements, and on-scene judgment in an era without traffic cameras, a national alert system, or modern DNA profiling. Searches confined to a narrow area, sweeps of nearby neighborhoods, and manual cross-checking of Bronco vehicle owners could not overcome the technological gaps of that time. As a result, just 2 years later, the case was transferred to the cold case unit, becoming a file that lay dormant in storage due to the lack of viable investigative leads. In the 1990s, although DNA technology began to be used in forensics, the Chloe case could not be reopened because no biological samples had been collected in 1982, and there was no physical evidence linked to the victim. This was a decade of impasse. Even as the investigative field advanced rapidly, the file remained stagnant due to the absence of foundational data. The development of federal databases also provided little help. Whitaker moved frequently, used cash, and avoided all tracking systems, making him virtually disappear from law enforcement's radar. The 2000s marked the emergence of systemic improvements, such as digitizing records, building population databases, and enhancing federal information retrieval capabilities. However, No new leads emerged to reactivate the case. All efforts were limited to better storage, standardizing cold case investigative procedures, and waiting for a sufficiently significant breakthrough to revisit the file. The true turning point only arrived in the 2010s and 2020s, when expanded DNA testing, particularly autosomal genealogy DNA, became a tool for solving cases that seemed forever unsolvable. In Chloe's case, what was impossible in 1982 became feasible in 2022. A single voluntary DNA sample from a woman named Anna Carson unlocked the entire file. The role of DNA technology in this case went beyond simply confirming identity. It redefined how investigative agencies understand the journey of a long-term missing victim. Maternal DNA allowed direct maternal lineage connections to be established. Autosomal DNA revealed parent-child relationships with near-absolute accuracy, and sibling match testing strengthened broader family ties. Other forensic tests, childhood fingerprints, scars, lung tissue, served only as supplementary evidence, while DNA played the pivotal role, shifting the file from unsolvable to fully verified identity. DNA technology also enabled the complete reconstruction of the victim's and perpetrator's 40-year journey. Through cross-referencing scattered residency data, bills, hospital records, and forensic analysis, the cold case unit rebuilt a travel route spanning 3 states, clearly illustrating the isolated lifestyle pattern that Whitaker imposed. This marked the first time in cold case unit history that a long-term missing person case was resolved not only in terms of identity, but also with a detailed reconstruction of the victim's survival journey. The Chloe Russell case thus becomes an important precedent, demonstrating 3 key factors. First, that recovering a living victim after decades is entirely possible. Second, that seemingly cold missing persons cases can still be solved through modern forensic technology. And third, that the replacement child model, often hard to detect because the perpetrator acts alone, can be identified by combining behavioral analysis, timelines, and DNA data. On a societal level, the case has provided a major boost for families with long missing children, opening hope that other cold cases could be resolved by applying modern technology. Legally, the Chloe case has become a model for reopening files based on DNA data, compelling investigative units in multiple states to adjust procedures for storing and managing old evidence in preparation for potential reanalysis with new techniques. When piecing together the full 4-decade picture, the cold case unit determined that the Chloe Russell case closed in a special status, resolved as to identity, not fully resolved as to perpetrator. Although the victim's identity has been confirmed and the perpetrator Whitaker's journey reconstructed, gaps remain that cannot be filled. The true reason he chose Chloe, the months with no data in the timeline, and whether or not the mysterious woman who briefly appeared in the victim's memory actually existed. These questions, while not altering the legal conclusion, illustrate that justice in long-term missing persons cases is always two-sided. One part resolved by science, the rest still lingering in the shadows of memory and the perpetrator's death. Nevertheless, at its core, the cold case unit accomplished the most important thing, restoring the true identity to a woman who lost it at age 3 and recovering the truth that the Russell family had waited 40 years for. The case has been closed, but not in the way it was in 1984, when the file was shelved in the cold storage, but with a comprehensive conclusion grounded in science, perseverance, and technological advancement. This is the greatest legacy of the Chloe Russell file, proof that time may delay justice, but it cannot prevent it when people are determined to pursue the truth to the end. The story of the Chloe Russell case, a child abducted in 1982 and found alive only after 40 years, is not just a remarkable criminal file. It also reflects many societal issues facing the United States today. The fact that Whitaker could move the victim across 3 states without leaving traces underscores the importance of community vigilance and reporting unusual behavior. In the context of modern America, where privacy is highly valued, the story offers a practical lesson. Privacy rights should not become a barrier that causes us to ignore risks, especially when children are involved. A key detail is the absence of an alert system like Amber Alert in 1982. Today, that system has developed strongly, but its effectiveness still depends on how quickly the public responds and the level of community attention. The story reminds us that every Amber message or missing person alert is not just an annoying notification on your phone, it could be the only chance to save a child. The fact that Chloe lived for over 40 years without documentation, without education, and without basic medical care also reflects issues that America still faces: isolated communities and invisible individuals undetected by the system. This emphasizes the importance of building stronger social networks and encouraging people to pay attention to anomalies in their neighborhoods. A strange vehicle, a child who never goes to school, or someone living in excessive isolation. Finally, Chloe's reintegration journey serves as a reminder that healing is a long process requiring patience, support, and understanding, values that American society continues to strive to uphold in families, communities, and the legal system. Thank you for following the 40-year investigation journey of Chloe Russell. If you believe stories like this deserve to be continued, please hit subscribe to join us. See you in the next video, where we will continue exploring unsolved mysteries and the journeys to bring truth back to light.